What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Bets and Banter, and you know that we got a power panel today. What does that mean? It means that we can't just break it down with one great guest. We're breaking it down with two great guests. And you're saying to yourself, what are we breaking down? UFC Vegas 95. It's going down live from the Apex Center. It's headlined by Marcin Tybura, and the Polar Bears, Sergey Spivak. They're running it back. We got bookend rematches, the first fight of the night, the last fight of the night. I'm excited to break it all down with the sharpest chat in the game and with my two great guests. So without further ado, let's bring in our guy, John Stargarian, friend of the show. Welcome back, my brother, the co-host of Club and Sub. My man, how you feeling this week?
I'm good. I'm pumped to talk about it. I appreciate you having me on, Liam. I'm excited to break this card down. Honestly, 10 fights could be better, could be worse, but I actually kind of enjoyed the tape for this card, so I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I feel for all the DraftKings and FanDuel fantasy homies that are just trying to be unique on a 10-fight slate that is absolute dog shit in some places, but I'm excited to break it down nonetheless. And we got a Northeast power panel today. We got the King of Buffalo, none other than Pepe Sylvia in the building. My man, he's doing a gauntlet today, the marathon of shows. My brother, I appreciate you making the time as always. How are you, brother?
What up, guys? I'm feeling good. I was just thinking, like, with the amount of Apex cards, like, soon it's going to be like UFC Vegas 244. Like, it's just so ridiculous. And like, a lot of people complain about the quality of the cards because they have so many, but really it just brings like more betting. It's better for us gamblers because it's just more opportunities, more fights for us to make money on, and like. I mean, like, and the hardcore bettors, like, they're following the regionals. We know all the people who are on this card. It's not like, these are brand new fighters that we have to like get to know. Like, we know all these fighters and have been following them up until their debut to the UFC and whatever. So I tend to do better on these cards than pay-per-view cards, honestly.
You know, it wasn't always the case for me, but I've been just auditing my own results this year. Whenever you're in a little bit of a rough patch, you're like, all right, where was I a winner? How did I used to do this well? And I've been noticing that my results this year have been a lot better on, the Tyra versus Perez, low-key events, the ones that a lot of people are tuning out for, as opposed to the ones that are big pay-per-view cards where a lot of chalk has been rolling this year. So me and all my underdog bettors on the side, like, are we going to have any fun? Just one Sam Hughes, the only one? But my brother, John, it looks like you got something to add. Please contribute. Brother.
Yeah, actually in the same vein as what you were just saying, Liam. It's funny because I actually messaged Pepe this today. And I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to tell everybody that I'm betting on Marcin Tybura later on. But I was saying, like, and it kind of goes hand in hand with liquidity, right? Like I actually was auditing my results earlier and I noticed I've just been horrible on main events all time. And I think it kind of plays the same. There can be bigger edges on some of these smaller cards because liquidity is lower. It's like, I think one of the reasons I struggle with main events is, you think you see an edge, but if a fight's doing 20 million in liquidity, it's like, do you really have an edge? It's like betting into an NFL game day line, right? Whereas a shitty card like this, it's just like us and a couple thousand other people that are only looking at the card, right? You're not doing like $100 million in betting on UFC Vegas 95. So it is interesting, and I think there's definitely some angles for that, especially like it's similar to a regional card in some respects.
Absolutely. And honestly, man, I'm looking back right now. Main events have been my most profitable single category of any fight on the card. So it's one of these weird things where everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, right? For a long time, I wasn't profitable on the undercard, like the first 6 fights of the event. I've now gotten to that 2% ROI, clinging to profit there. But when I look, main events have been one of my strengths, and I haven't been betting them much this year, ironically. So it's something that I'm also looking at as like Verna Jandiroba, I had said, I think she's going to win the fight, but I just don't bet on chalk. So a lot of these chalk main event favorites have been coming through. But with that being said, guys, why don't we break down this fight card specifically, see if we can find any individual edges. I appreciate the top line perspective, though, and I'm sure a lot of people in the chat do as well. The first one up, guys, I know my guy Pepe's got some thoughts on this one. It's Talita Alencar taking on Stephanie Luciano. This is a rematch from the Contender Series. If y'all remember that fight, it was a very competitive fight in a lot of ways. You saw Alencar get to a lot of her positions. You saw, Luciano get back to her feet, but still not able to win the round, not able to claw it back, too much top control to overcome at that stage of the round. And so, it's an interesting fight because in round 3, it looked like she had a clear advantage. Honestly, I thought the ref had a very long leash for Alencar in terms of like laying on the ground, stand back up really slowly. Like there was a lot of times where she's like butt scooting slowly into the middle. I was like, they're really like letting her have some time, in between each stand up where it should have been a little bit more direct. And I also think tactically it was an error from, Luciano to continue like standing above her instead of like instantly calling her up to her feet every time. I think that's a tactical adjustment she might make for this contest, but she also has to survive those early grappling exchanges, which were dicey. She gave up her back in one of them as well. Pepe, how do you see this matchup going down? Where do you see any betting value on the board, brother?
Yeah, I played the Alencar side at plus 160. And I played it for a few reasons. Honestly, I look at this fight as more of like a pick'em type fight. And, you go back to their first fight when Alencar opened minus 175 and closed minus 250. And then she gassed out in the fight and almost got finished in round 3. And now she's plus 165. I think a lot of people are betting the Luciano side just because she's a lot younger and she's longer. Like her reach is way bigger than Alencar. But I think Alencar, despite her bad statistics, it's really difficult for me to lay juice against a WMMA fighter who has grappling upside. And I think Alencar's wrestling is decent despite her stats not really reflecting it. And once she got Luciano down, she was able to control her quite easily. And she was able to win rounds 1 and 2. And I do think she's still going to have that same amount of success. And you have to think about it. So you look at Alencar, like she's a world-class BJJ black belt, had been competing for a long time, but yes, she's 33, but she's only been doing MMA since 2021. So a lot of people are projecting that Luciano, since she's young, she's going to be the one making bigger improvements. But there's still a chance that Alencar is going to be making just as big improvements, if not more, because she's already mastered one part of MMA to a degree that Luciano won't get to in just a year's time. And I think if she learns how to blend her striking and wrestling, it's going to be big trouble for Luciano. I don't like Luciano's takedown defense. And part of it is her build. Like she's a very tall and thin strawweight. So her hips aren't that strong just because of her build. And I do think that Alencar should be able to have grappling success like she did in last fight. And I don't see why she can't get her down, put a body triangle in, and be able to control her. Now, on the Contender Series fight, she gassed out. But she did show in her UFC debut against Hayani Dos Santos, who is a decent UFC fighter. Despite her being 0-2 in the promotion, you could arguably say she should be 2-0. And she has a long regional career where she had success. She had the belt in LFA, I want to say, or Invicta, one of the two. But Alencar looked better in that fight. Her gas tank looked better. She was able to compete with her standing on the feet in round 3. And, it was a super close fight. I'm not going to say so-and-so should have won. I thought it was a toss-up. And Alencar was plus 150. I bet her in that spot. And now I'm getting a similar price again at like plus 160 to a fight where I project very close. So to me, Alencar is a clear side. And I think the juice on Luciano has gone way too far, in my opinion.
There you have it. So an underdog play to start off the card in the women's side of the game for our guy, Pepe Sylvia. John, how do you feel about this one? Do you agree? Are you taking any plays here? What are you thinking about, brother?
I bet Alencar as well at the same price. I trying to think of the best way to put this. If this fight was on August, what's it going to be? 10th, 2025. I don't think I'd be betting Alencar here, even at this price. I mean, the reality is Luciano is young. I do think we should expect her to make improvements. I think there's some decent aspects of her game. But something that really sticks out to me. So I saw some people mentioning the dengue fever thing in the chat. First of all, I don't think she is going to be suffering effects of it. I mean, Liam, you wrestled. You know what it's like. And I'm sure I did too. Our wrestling practices aren't nearly as severe as going through a full camp for professional MMA fight. If she was suffering ill effects of it, I don't think she'd be getting through camp. So I'm not bringing it up to say that I think it's going to impact her in the fight. I don't think it will at all, to be frank. But what I do think is notable is their last fight was in September of 2023. So that's 11 months ago. I think given that she had dengue fever, she probably didn't train for 3 to 6 months. So I think you have to kind of cap what kind of improvements she could have possibly made over the last, year. And if that's the case, I kind of just think, like, to Pepe's point, Alencar is going to likely be able to get a lot of the same positions. And so the real question comes down to, how likely is she to get 10-8'd or finished later in this fight, And I think she's going to slow down. I really do. But, like, you look at Stephanie Luciano, she has 2 finishes in her career in 6 fights against fairly low-level competition. I kind of think I don't really care what Alencar says about being sick. Obviously, she's going to make an excuse for it. That doesn't matter much to me. But just think about the amount of women's 10-8s you see in general. There just aren't very many. Like, I kind of think Alencar's round 3 was kind of like a tail risk scenario where it was like kind of on the outer tail of like what you could expect, it with her slowing down in that fight. So I just feel like it's not that likely she'll get 10-8'd or finished later in the fight, in my opinion anyway. Does that mean she's a lock to win rounds 1 and 2? No. I mean, Luciano is more physical. She obviously hits way harder. She could sway rounds with damaging strikes. I just feel like seeing what we saw, I know Luciano's got, or not Luciano, I know Alencar's got takedown and big control upside and potentially even some finishing upside on the mat. So, like, with that being the case and the fact that I don't think she's particularly likely to get finished, actually, I think I'd honestly kind of slightly edge to Alencar on finishing equity here just because, she obviously comes from a very decorated jiu-jitsu background. I just feel like, if you want to price Luciano a small favorite because, she's way younger, more physical, okay. But I just trust the credentials of Alencar more. I trust her combat experience she's had more. And, like, at the end of the day, we've seen this fight play out. It doesn't mean it's going to play the same, but yeah, I think it should be closer to pick'em personally.
Yeah, I definitely see the argument for a pick'em type price. I would struggle to price Alencar a substantial favorite. The reason being, just I haven't liked the output from her. Right, the output typically doesn't win UFC fights when you're having 66 total strikes. I think it was in the 30s for significant strikes both times. But I don't like grapplers that don't strike. Bothers me, right? And I will give you a second chance. That's typically my approach because Jacqueline Amorim was like minus 225 when she came to the UFC against Sam Hughes. And I was like, she's a great prospect. And she went out there and lost. And I obviously didn't lay the chalk there because I was like, it's women's MMA chalk. What could go wrong? Everything. So I didn't play it. But then after the fact, I was like, I still think she's the good. Sam Hughes cheated her ass off. I was like, I really just think she could win if she goes out there and is assertive with her strikes. She's out there like going for every submission in the book. And when you do that, you don't give yourself much left, right? You could either go out there and look for a finish really quick, 1,000,000 miles per hour, Derek Minner it, and then you've got nothing left the rest of the fight. And you're just like a sitting duck. And so I feel like Alencar, went out there in her last fight. She was in a much more easy fight, I feel. Honestly, just like a less dangerous fight on the feet. Rayando Santos can't bust a grape as far as I'm concerned. Like, I do think she has some well-rounded skills. She can go out there and have a 15-minute, 25-minute MMA fight. I just really don't think she's a dangerous fighter, and I don't rate her that way. I thought that Pooja Tomar was live, and I was like, she's going to have 15 minutes to go out there and point kickbox with this girl who doesn't use her grappling that is supposedly her best asset. So that for me is another problem. It's like her best asset against Alencar is zeroed out. So it's like now it's going to be her best asset is her kickboxing. She sucks on the feet. She's very average there. So I think that when you look at this girl, the one bullish case that you can make for her is, okay, she's now felt what Alencar is bringing. So it's like, okay, can she change anything about her approach to make it harder to take her down? I definitely think she can. She was throwing a lot of knees, things like up on one foot, where he was literally just getting barreled over by Alencar. And when you're a tall fighter, you guys mentioned it, the hips are right there. So if you're going to put yourself on one foot, you're falling over. It doesn't matter even if you're a better wrestler. And I think that when you look at how she approached it, she also had these opportunities where many times, Alencar desperately pulls guard and lays on her back. Terrible visual. But then she doesn't do anything to take advantage of it. She's kicking her in the leg and standing too far back, or calling her up to her feet after 30 seconds, letting time pass by, letting Alencar recompose and then get back up and take her down. I was like, that is just not the right game plan, right? The way to break somebody like Alencar is to continue pressure. Come forward, make her go from second one till the end. And her coaches told her in round 1, this girl is getting tired. And they were right. But she didn't take advantage until it was too late. And by the end of the fight, again, like there was a few awkward moments where they're like against the fence, he's trying to stop it with strikes. She was clearly still in the fight defending. But Alencar just like had these moments where she'd be like sitting there and like pulling herself into guard. I've seen fights get stopped like that, where they say, get up, and you don't get up right away. And they go, thanks anyways. And they just wave it off. I can see that happening in this reiteration. So for me, if I was going to play this fight, you guys know I don't lay chalk. That's not what I do. In a low-level WMMA fight, they got 15 fights apiece. If you combine them all, amateur, pro, and whatever, I don't need that. But what I do look at is like, is there value on round 2 and round 3? I actually think that there is, because we've seen how this can go wrong for Alencar. And then additionally, the KO, I always look for WMMA KO lines as like a signal. And when I see KO lines that are like plus 450 and below, they do actually hit at a decent rate because they're never that low, right? They're always pricing in that these fights are going to go the distance. And so they're giving some KO equity in this spot. And I think that it's justified. I actually think the ends KO could be interesting as well. It's a similar price. And Alencar, what could she change? I always think, what could you change in a rematch, right? I think that for the one side, it's very clear. Like, don't go to the ground, keep this upright, and I can win this fight easily and potentially knock her out and hurt her. But on the other side, it's like, what if I take this girl down and instead of going for submissions, trying to pass the guard and get desperate, I just hold her down and open up with elbows? Just like in her second fight in the UFC, Jacqueline Amarim got on top, mounted, and just beat Conejo to a bloody pulp and cashed me a plus 1,600. So it's the same kind of line right now. And when I say, if you have the position, dominance, to go out there and submit somebody, you're in the same spot to go out there and knock them out or just TKO them, get them belly down in the back mount, and then it's it. It's like a couple punches to the side of the head, the other person can't move, and the fight's over. It doesn't matter if they're fully conscious and like aware, they can't defend intelligently, the fight's over. So I think that for me, those are the kind of contrarian ways I'd look to play it. A fight not to go the distance, I think, is live as well. We saw last time out, Alencar had how many, 7.5 minutes or 6 minutes of grappling dominance. It's like, that's plenty of time for her to get her game off in an ideal world. Most of her finishes are early rear naked chokes. And it's like, okay, conversely, if the dengue fever, which we have a hard time capping into the line, is a real problem and the cardio's not there, then she was giving up the back mount and in a bunch of terrible positions from round 1 and round 2 on. So I think it could get dicey for either woman. And Alencar saying, I'm coming in more confident, I'm making all these changes. So if that's the case, maybe she's going to be more assertive. Please, boys.
Give
your thoughts.
Another thing that I wanted to mention on the Talita side was, she only had 4 MMA fights before the Contender Series fight, and she didn't face any adversity in those fights. So I actually don't mind her, gaining the experience and like pushing through the adversity. Obviously the optics were really bad, but part of it is learning how to pace yourself. So I still think she's learning to implement that as part of her game. And I think she will be able to make improvements in her pacing. And I don't mind that she went through all of that adversity. A lot of people look at it as a big negative, and obviously it wasn't great. But on the flip side, she now has that experience to go forward with.
Absolutely.
So Liam, do you think the under is an interesting look, or do you think because I'm looking at it right now as we speak, and it's plus 215. I'm just like, is that the market pricing it appropriately? Because that is honestly on the low side for a WMMA fight. But you made a pretty compelling case for it, without saying it, I should say.
That would be the way. Oh, well, I think I said the fight not to go the distance. And honestly, I'd want 2 to 1. I'd want 2 to 1. I'd have to price shop and see if I could get the right price. But I think blindly what happens a lot of times on fight day is people go WMMA overs, put them together. Put them together. Throw them in a
parlay.
Exactly. And so I do wait for the parlay cash. I think that on men's fights, you expect the fight not to go the distance prop is going to get hit on fight day. And I think the opposite is true in WMMA. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. Prayers up that people see the draw and they say nobody can get a finish. I see 2 women that have clear paths to a finish here.
Fair enough.
All right, next up, fellas. Oh, please, no, if anybody has something more to add, go ahead. All right, next up, we've got Yusuf Zalal taking on Jarno Errens, and I got to do a little bit of a bow for my guy Yusuf Zalal, plus 125, ITD plus 500. Last time out against Billy the Squid, and I like Billy Quarantillo, and I hadn't had a great time betting on his fights, but I will just say I said Yusuf Zalal was a good fighter, like years ago when he was fighting in the UFC, and it looked like I was an asshole, right? It looked like I had no eye for MMA. He goes out there, 3-fight losing skid, gets cut from the promotion as a young guy. And I was like, damn, like maybe I just was way off about this guy. Goes on a 5-fight winning streak outside the promotion. And for me, I was like, now he's finishing. Now he's aggressive. Now he's coming out there and asserting himself. And that was what he was lacking before. He was like out there like having fun and like being a little bit of a jackass. But he had skill, he had talent, he was still competing, but he was like losing too many positions in too many minutes and letting fights pass him by. So it doesn't matter if you're skilled if you don't fight to your potential. So I feel like we've seen a little bit more fighting to his potential recently in terms of looking for the finish, asserting himself and being aggressive. And last time out, I mean, he almost finished the fight in round 1. I thought his striking was on point. I thought that his grappling looked sensational. We've never seen somebody dominate Billy Q like that. But I do think it was a function of, he hurt him on the feet several times. Yeah. But in any case, like I was still impressed by the performance. It was like step 1, step 2, step 3, and it's over. Very aggressive. And he almost had it at the end of the first round as well. So for me, it was a sensational performance. Does that mean he should be minus 500 in his next UFC fight? I'm not necessarily convinced on that. I'm not going to be chasing the number from plus 125 last time I got it to minus 500 this time. But I do think that Jarno Errens, a guy I bet on and picked to win outright in his last fight, that was mostly a fade on his opponent, a guy that had taken 3 Contender Series fights to get signed to the UFC in Stephen Wynn. He's not a terrible fighter, but he's a guy that absorbs a lot of damage, frankly, in his fights. Been knocked out by Elon Cruz regionally. So I just was like very concerned for him coming into that fight. And Jarno Errens has power. He's shown that in the past. He doesn't have very much consistency, though. If I have to make a criticism, sometimes he's out there looking good. Other times he's out there looking very poor. Sometimes his cardio looks okay. Other times it looks terrible. His grappling and wrestling is really not good. But he has some judo throws. So it's like you'll see these moments of like, oh, my God. Like Jarno Errens will hit these cool tricks and techniques. But it's almost like, one cool trick and then he doesn't really have anything to fill the next 2 minutes. And it's a little bit more huffing and puffing and stuff like that. So he showed more volume in his last fight against a very hittable opponent. I think Zalal is a little bit more fleet of foot. I think he's more likely to mix in the grappling and have success doing it. But again, I think the line's a little wide. So money line, I would say it's a dog or pass situation. I think Zalal sub is a tiny bit short. I would have liked a better price there if I was going to get involved on that side. I think that there may be slight value on the KO. I say this as somebody who bet the KO last time and thought, like what it was like, a coin flip on whether it was going to cash. When he hits him in the body multiple times, he falls over and then takes the neck. It's like he could have easily KO'd him in there. And you're looking at 800 last time. Now it's 1050. I'm like, is he less likely to KO Jarno Errens than Billy Q, who's like a very fucking tough guy who didn't get dropped by what's his name, Sung Woo Choi? Like they both dropped each other. But the other thing to remember there, guys, is like, he dropped Sung Woo Choi and just like stood there like a zombie because he was so tired. He was like, fuck this. Like, I got 30 seconds now. Ooh, he's like sitting there recovery breathing. And I'm like, dog, like you got to go for the finish. And that for me was like a little bit of a jarring note. Against a guy like Zalal, he ain't going to give you fucking time. He's not going to give you breathers. He's really just going to try and be on your ass from second 1 till the end. So for me, I think Zalal is going to fuck him up. The more I think about the fight in terms of pace, I just think he's too much in terms of pace, but could he get clipped? Yeah, sure. It's a 145-pound fight, and Errens carries some power, so can't get caught speeding laying minus 500, I feel. How about you, John?
Yeah, it's funny. I almost laid the minus 250 on Zalal like over the weekend. I think on like Friday or Saturday in this fight. And I mean, obviously I should have, as it turns out, because he's minus 440 now. But the reason I didn't is not because I think Errens is huge value. I just personally don't like. I bet Billy in his last fight. And it was a horrible read. I mean, it was a great read by you, but I don't like betting on a guy who just went from being undervalued by the market to having a dominant like breakout performance. Like those guys tend to get dramatically overvalued in their next fight. But I do think I'm kind of with you. I kind of think it could play out a bit more boring. It kind of depends to me like what Zalal wants to do on the ground and what Errens wants to do. I've heard some people make an Errens case to me, but my question is just like, okay, like, do you think Jarno is going to work up off his back? Like, I haven't seen it yet. I just haven't, and so I don't really think he has the level of jiu-jitsu to really trouble Zalal from top position personally. And so if that's the case, like I think takedowns are going to be pretty easy, and I think he's probably going to play guard. And to your point, Liam, even if they stand, Zalal is a lot more mobile. He's got better footwork. He throws good calf kicks, and Errens does not seem to deal particularly well with those. So, yeah, I mean, I think Zalal should win. I wanted to target like overs and goes the distance, but they're like turbo juice too. So, like you made the case for sub, and that could be a thing, but it's probably a pass for me. But I think Zalal is just a terrible matchup for Errens personally.
Honestly, based on the numbers, I would go I would preference the KO over the sub based on the value. Now, do I think it's more likely? No, but I think it was a coin flip. I felt like last time whether he was going to snatch the sub or end up just like ground and pound TKOing him. So for me, that would be the way I'd think about it is like ITD, KO, fight not to go the distance, those kind of more angles covered. But I appreciate the sentiments, my brother. What do you think about this one, Pepe? Are we off to the races, Jarno Errens, or what are you thinking? Two dogs to start the night?
No, I'm actually not going to be taking the shot on Jarno. Actually, the prop that I like best for this fight is Zalal round 3, 10-1 on DraftKings. And that way you capture the KO and submission equity late. And I don't think he's going to just like run through Jarno. Like Jarno is decent positionally sound, but I do think that he could put a pace on him and get like an attritional finish. And I think his grappling has improved a ton since working with, rolling with Isaac Dalgarian every day. You can tell he's made great strides with it. So I could see him wearing out Jarno. And I really didn't like the look of Jarno going down to the leg kicks from Choi. Zalal throws pretty good leg kicks. So I think there's a few different avenues for him to dominate and get a round 3 finish. I mean, round 2 wouldn't surprise me. A decision by Zalal wouldn't surprise me. But for the value from what I'm seeing, I think the 10-1 is not a bad way to go about it.
Fair play, my brother. And what I want to give on the way out here is a little bit of good news, bad news for my Instagram stock on Jarno Errens. The good news is my man looks like he's in incredible shape. He looks like he's very prepared in terms of his physical conditioning for this fight. Looks like he did the requisite work, in the weight room, in the sprints, things like that. However, the bad news is I believe I saw him get promoted to blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 14 weeks ago. And if that is the case, guys, Billy Q was getting audited position for position, like too fast was the law in the transitions for him. I felt like even absent the striking dynamics, I just felt like he was going step for step too quick for a guy who's a little bit older. And I think for Jarno Errens, he's not a little bit older, but he's a little bit slower in the transitions if he's at a blue belt level. And I think that could ultimately be a problem, whether it's positionally or with the submission. I just think he could find himself in some really bad spots.
He hasn't really faced any like really good grapplers either, so he could get completely.
Yeah, he did in Russia, and he got submitted by one, and he hasn't been finished since. So I think that's another interesting note. He's been match made accordingly, I feel. And William Gomis, I think he almost triangled at one point, but like Gomis, I do not rate as a grappler. So we'll hear more from him in the Joe Anderson Brito fight. But next up, guys, we've got a weird one here where Karl Williams is taking on Jhonata Diniz in one of the more binary fights probably on the card. Pepe, we'll have you start us off here if you don't mind. And, about a plus 170, plus 180 underdog is Diniz, minus 200 or so on Karl Williams. He's a wrestler. He's going to put his head down, try and wrestle this guy. Do you think he's getting the takedowns?
Yeah, I would imagine he's going to get a takedown at some point, but I'm actually not interested in laying the juice on him, to be honest, just because Diniz is a really high-level kickboxer, and Williams kind of has shown that he is kind of a knockout waiting to happen. And, the Tafa fight, yeah, he grappled him for 3 rounds, but there was some kind of sketchy moments where if you laid the juice on him, you might have been kind of worried that he was going to get clipped. And Tafa is probably the worst grappler in the division, I want to say. Like, he just has nothing. So I do think that Diniz is live, but, just showing like the way Austin Lane got mount on him in round 1 isn't very bullish for him. So, like you said, it's a very binary fight. one that I'm not going to get involved with. I just think like the KO can happen at any time, so I don't want to lay juice on it over. But if it goes over 1.5, it might go the distance too. So yeah, I just feels like a gamble, honestly, to me. So I'm not going to get involved in this one.
Fair play, my man. I want to just shout out Adolfo in the chat, says, smash the like, guys. These guys deserve it. Appreciate you, brother. And I got to just say, we had less than 100 likes on the last stream, and we had thousands of people watching. Come on.
That's fucked up.
Drop a like on the show. Show a little bit of love,
some appreciation here.
I would appreciate it. That's a free 99 way to show a little love and support. John, how do you feel about this heavyweight slopper?
Honestly, like prior to Williams' last fight with Tafa, I would have smashed him at -200. I bet him against Tafa at -170, and like saw a bunch of people being like, he's a liability on the feet. Tafa's going to knock him out. And I was like, you guys are so fucking stupid. He's just going to ragdoll this guy. And that, I mean, he more or less did, but that was like very sweaty. Like my view of that fight was, if Karl Williams gets him down, I don't care how bad his control is. This dude's not getting up. Like, this guy is horrible on bottom. But then he did get up, like, 4 separate times. And he hurt him in that fight. And Williams seemed to tire down the stretch. And that, like, it makes me deeply concerned about a fight like this. Like, I kind of have the same view. I think Williams should get takedowns, and I think he should dominate him on the mat. Like, you saw Diniz get taken down by Austin Lane. Williams, obviously a better grappler than Austin Lane. And Diniz didn't even really try to work up. He just closed guard. But, like, the guy is, like, he's an experienced kickboxer, but he's very young in his MMA career, right? Like, he's only, like, 6 fights into it. So, I mean, given guys like Bresky and Tafa have worked up against Williams, like, would it take many large improvements for Diniz to do it? I'm not really sure it would, which is where really my source of concern comes from, because to Pepe's point, I do think Diniz is obviously very, very dangerous on the feet, and he's a lot less rote than Tafa, who's really just looking to land a left hand. Like, the guy's got power in both hands. He kind of knows how to set up his shots a bit. So, I mean, that's kind of why I'm not interested in the money line. I think, if anything, I'll say this. I have seen Williams' cardio shouted out this week as being bad. I actually think he's got much better cardio than Diniz does. And, you know, you watch the Lane fight. Obviously, Lane was, like, dead gassed out in round 2. But, I mean, you look at how much slower the shots were coming from Diniz versus in round 1 or versus his Contender Series fight. And I think he slowed down pretty bad. Something I kind of, I don't know if I'll bet it or not, because the numbers aren't great, but I do think there's a non-zero chance that, like, Diniz getting grappled for 7 or 8 minutes leads to him just being so gassed that Williams kind of sets up a pretty easy arm triangle. You know, like, sometimes when a guy, like, I mean, you know, Liam, like, not that an arm triangle is like an unsophisticated submission, but it's the kind of submission that, you know, these heavyweights, you don't really have to know that much if your opponent doesn't know how to defend it. And I could pretty easily see him kind of grabbing that, like, later in this fight. So sub 2, sub 3 may be interesting on the Williams side, but, like, as far as the number goes, if it got bet down to -160, I'd be interested in Williams, but I do think he's probably going to present some openings for Diniz a couple times in this fight in round 1 and round 2, enough that I don't really want to get involved at, like, -200.
You know, I think I've donated to Karl Williams by submission before because he went out there and just easily dominated a Tom DeBlas purple belt and like out wrestled Jimmy Lawson, who is the Tom DeBlas purple belt in question, who is also a wrestler for Penn State, who I saw wrestle in person at the Rack in the heart of New Jersey, John. But in any case, what I saw from Karl Williams is that he's like allergic to finishing. He doesn't want to. He's not interested. He did attempt, I believe, 1 submission officially in his last fight. So maybe he's inching towards that, final submission win. Curtis Blades, through all of his fights, no submission attempts, right? It's like you're always hoping and waiting.
I've donated on the Blades submission about 100 times.
Exactly. It's a rite of passage, right? You have to look at these guys. And I've also called a bunch of first career submissions. So sometimes you got to risk it to get the biscuit. But I look at a Karl Williams as a guy who should have a lot of top time in his fights. But I do think my guy Pepe literally said an exact phrase I've said this week, which is he's a walking knockout waiting to happen. Like, the way he strikes, he's just like out there engaging. He got 1 takedown, I think, on like 1 million attempts against Chase Sherman. So it's like if you go out there and you have these low-level fights where he's not the biggest guy in almost any fight. He looks like a light heavyweight. Like, he's kind of just a tweener for heavyweight. So he goes out there, he's strong. He can go out there and find the takedowns early. He can just, like, horse his way into it. But, of course, that's going to make you tired. Like, he's lifting up heavy individuals and trying to slam them. So I think that Diniz was probably going to have 2 opportunities in this fight, to knock him out. And I think after he gets taken down, if he gets taken down a second time, it's probably going to be wraps from there. But yeah, again, the thing about Austin Lane that I haven't heard many people remark upon, it's like, if you're an NFL player and you can't tackle some fucking kickboxer, like, you should probably not have made the NFL. So it's like, okay, he went out there, he tackled the guy, he got on top of him, but Austin Lane doesn't really have a depth of skill, which is why he's completely exhausted from fighting against form. And he doesn't really have a coherent game on the feet either. It's mostly like throw big strikes, hope the guy dies. And so I think that when you look at a guy like Karl Williams, he's not a complete flake on the feet. He'll go out there and have the boxing match. He's just not very good. So that is where he could definitely get exposed in a fight like this. Diniz has power. So for me, it's like Diniz by KO or Karl Williams sub or decision. Seems pretty straightforward. But also the one other thing I'll mention is like Karl could TKO him, but he's just not a very aggressive man. So I don't know if I see that. Please go ahead, Pepe. Did you have
Yeah, so Diniz, he only had 6 fights before his 6 MMA fights before his UFC debut, and he finished all those guys like very early. So he really hasn't had to really pace himself at all. So I think he's also going to get the learning experience of going through extended fights, and it's kind of hard to cap how much improvement he will be able to make from fight to fight because he's transitioning from kickboxing. Some people are able to learn to defensively grapple, over a period of time. Some people never get it. So, and I think it's really hard to be able to cap and know how much improvement he's going to be making in between fights, because obviously he doesn't really have to train that hard on his striking in a fight like this. All he has to do is just defensively grapple nonstop for this camp. So can we see improvements from him? Is there a chance that his cardio might look a little bit better because, he was finally pushed a little bit in that last fight and he was able to get the finish. Granted, Lane was gassed too, but I do think there's room for improvement on the Diniz side. I will say that. And Glinbot made a decent point about how Diniz by decision is potentially live. Given, maybe he rocks Karl and Karl is able to panic wrestle and get him down. Or they both get gassed in round 3 and it's a sloppy kickboxing match in round 3. So I do think there is a world where Diniz does win by decision and there's plus 800 available. I don't know if I'm going to get there. I'm still kind of mulling that one over.
Yeah, for me, the downside with that is just that I could see him getting finished. So like doesn't have a chance to make it there. But I also see the vast majority of his win equity as a knockout. Like if he's landing good shots, like I just don't expect Karl Williams is going to be like, we're all cool in the gang. Like I just think that's probably going to be.
Well, the thing is,
Williams,
what if he does hit him and then Williams kind of gets hurt, but he's able to grab his leg and drag him to the ground, and then Diniz can't get up, but he still rocked him and has won the round.
Yeah, that's fair play. We've definitely seen that before. So, it's heavyweight MMA. We see it oftentimes expected to end inside the distance. It can sneak over. It can find a way through. And especially recently, I think if you look at like the last year, heavyweight fights have been going over a little bit more than they're expected to over like a broader sample of like 5 years of data, for example. So something we want to monitor is like if it's changing as more heavyweights become push into the fence and lean on you, drunk man fighting, then we got to cap that in as well. Next up, guys, we've got a stinker in the women's bantamweight division, depending on your perspective. That's mine. But it's Karol Rosa taking on Pannie, Kianzad, and these women have gone to decision in, I want to say, 9 out of 9 fights for Karol Rosa. I think it's 8 out of 10 for Pannie Kianzad. So the decision's going to be bet to bits here, and I think that when I look at who has potential finishing upside, one woman's been finished twice. It's not like Pannie Kianzad went out there and established a couple of great finishes on her resume, right? It's like she got finished by Macy Chiasson and then got finished again by Macy Chiasson faster. So I think that is a huge liability. Her grappling is not very good. I don't think that, Karol Rosa is like a great fighter, but she's been working on her grappling. I saw her get rolled up into a ball by Raquel Canuto on the Fight Pass Invitational or whatever that was. And I think Denise Gomes and a few other UFC fighters were there. So I like to see her out there testing her grappling, trying to get better in that department. Her only losses inside the distance as a pro were both pre-UFC, both via submission. So that's where she needed to improve her skills. And I don't think Pannie Kianzad's going to submit her. I think if it's a competitive striking match on the feet, Karol Rosa will probably do just a little bit more. And I think that, if it is a fight that ends up on the ground, I think Pannie's a huge liability. So that's the way I see the fight. I haven't bet anything on it, but I've made some donations on Karol ITD before. I've made some donations on Karol round 3 before. And then she's on top throwing elbows with 30 seconds left. And you're like, why were we not here like 2 rounds ago, at least establishing some damage on the way, right? She gets to these good spots late, but often it's just too little too late, and it's not as assertive as you hope for. Even the Yana Santos fight, like easy takedown with like 30 seconds left. You're like, why are we waiting? But in any case, I think that, she's not a trustworthy fighter at -210, but I expect her to win this fight. And I think that she has the clearer path to both a decision and a finish. Pepe, how do you feel about this one, my brother?
Yeah, I got in on Rosa at -135, so like a shit ton of CLV on that one, so she's guaranteed to lose by split. But yeah, I capped her around -175, honestly, when I tipped this play out. And so if you look back at her last fight, she's taking on Irene Aldana, and there were some good things that you could take from that performance, and there were some not as good things that you can take from that performance. One of the things that I liked a lot was she showed toughness in that fight. Like, it was a super high-paced fight. It was a violent fight. A lot of strikes were landed. Both of them landed a shit ton. And her leg kicks looked really good. And if you go back and go out throughout Pannie's career, she's struggled with getting leg kick, especially in the Alexis Davis fight. Alexis Davis is not good on the feet. She's a grappler, and, she's kind of a punching bag. And Pannie had some boxing success in round 1. Her boxing is pretty clean. Like, I would say maybe it's even a little bit better than Rosa's straight boxing. However, she's very one-dimensional in that regard. And in that fight, Davis showed that you can exploit her with the leg kicks. And Alexis Davis doesn't really throw that hard of leg kicks. If you watch Rosa's leg kicks against Aldana compared to the leg kicks that Davis was landing, Rosa's leg kicks are way more hard, and she throws a lot more of them. She has better cardio so that she's able to do that. She took Aldana off of her feet in round 1. Aldana's leg was super fucked up. Now, what I didn't like about the Aldana fight was that she didn't try to grapple at all. Like, she just went to war with like one of the best boxers in the division. And maybe she was trying to put a show on for the fans or whatever. A lot of people will say that was the best WMMA fight of the year, and it was a very entertaining fight. But she had a clear grappling upside in that fight, and she didn't choose to go for it whatsoever. And you can kind of categorize Rosa as not always showing the best fight IQ, where she'll have strengths in different fights and she won't use them. But all of that said, I do think she has way more upside in this fight, because when she has gone to her grappling, her takedown entries are actually really solid. And Kianzad is a pretty low-level grappler. I mean, Rosa is a black belt, but she doesn't really hunt submissions. She's more position over submission. So I don't really think that she's going to get any kind of submission. I do think Rosa wins by decision at a really high clip. And yeah, I just saw a bunch of value. She's younger. She's fought the better competition, in my opinion. She's more durable. She hits harder, in my opinion. She's more violent. So yeah, I like Rosa quite a bit, but I wouldn't lay the -200 for sure.
I understand your concerns. John, you could go ahead. Somebody in the chat was saying that your microphone was loud. It sounds perfectly normal to me. But
I'm trying to lower it. I'll try to bring the volume down a bit here. I mean, I don't have a bet on this fight. And it's funny because I looked at the Rosa line and then it got bet. And then it got to -200, and I was kind of thinking about betting Pannie. But I see, like, I'm not going to go through the whole fight again. I think Pepe did a good job breaking it down. I see two big issues, like, on the Pannie side, because in my head, I'm still like, man, Karol Rosa at -200 seems like a big price for Karol Rosa. She, not because she doesn't have skills, obviously very high output. She's decently well-rounded, but she just tends to be in a lot of close fights. And, whether she'll grapple or not tends to be a coin flip. To Pepe's point, she didn't even try to grapple Irene Aldana. But with that said, it's like with Pannie, you have someone who has some very good skills in the boxing, right? She's pretty high output. She can keep a pace. She's got very, very crisp boxing, throws right down the pipe, which is what you want to see. But she's got a couple flaws. First of all, I think we all know, and I think the market probably knows it, when she ends up on bottom, she just doesn't have anything there. It's just, we've seen it over and over again throughout her career. It hasn't gotten better. It just, it is what it is. And if anyone's going to hit takedowns in this fight, it's Rosa. Do I project Rosa to get 2 to 3 takedowns? No, but I think I project her to get 1. So it's like, if we're starting off the bat with Rosa probably winning 1 round in what's going to be a high volume fight, how passionate can I be on Pannie? The second thing is she's just like very non-assertive. Like, she's had a close fight with Betch Correia, a few years back during COVID, I believe. She fought Sijara Eubanks. Now, I lost a lot of money on Sijara Eubanks that fight, but got dominated on the ground in the first round. By round 3, Sarge had like no gas left in the tank at all. And yet somehow that ended up being a close round 3 because she just wouldn't really put a stamp on it. She wouldn't up the volume despite having a gassed opponent in front of her. To Pepe's point, you saw the same thing in the Alexis Davis fight, not just the leg kicks, but like, I love Alexis Davis. She's one of my favorite female fighters ever. I bet her a ton. I bet her in that fight. But like Alexis, it was pretty clear beyond the leg kick, she didn't have much for her. And Pannie, never really, it was fairly high output, but she wasn't really trying to go for the kill at any point. And that's kind of like the story of her career. She kind of just stays in neutral. She takes what you give her, and that's it. She's not going to really deviate from the game plan ever. And so she's in this fight, and like, yeah, if Karol doesn't wrestle and doesn't compromise her with leg kicks, it's probably competitive. But even in a competitive fight, I think Rosa is more likely to clinch her up. I think Rosa is more likely to land a critical hit. And obviously then you factor in she can compromise with leg kicks and potentially get takedowns and get on top of her. And it's like, I can picture what a Pannie win looks like fairly easily in my head. I just feel like a Pannie win is going to very, very often be a very competitive fight that's very close and hard to decipher who won. Whereas I can very easily picture Rosa winning the fight fairly dominantly. And so with that dynamic, I'm happy to pass. Like, I think Pannie can compete here. I just don't think she does enough beyond the boxing to really feel comfortable with her in this kind of a fight.
There you have it. I basically feel the same way. I don't think I could trust either woman at the current prices, right? Like, I don't think there's enough upside on Pannie to bet her at this price, knowing that if she gets taken down, the fight could be, over. And then conversely, I think that on the other side, Karol Rosa has shown enough times she's a bonehead that you don't want to get caught speeding at -210. So if you're like Pepe and you're sitting on, a huge amount of closing line value, that's fair play. If you're looking for, as my guy Paul Shaughnessy and Safdie say, the CF dot model, and you just bet WMMA underdogs for the love and sake of it, then I do agree that this could be a potential spot where it's just, hey, the number's blown out a little bit. But ultimately, I think Karol Rosa is a deserved favorite. So no action for me on that fight.
Also, I do think they're giving her like a much better matchup because, she went to the T-Mobile Arena and fought Aldana, a place where Aldana has a lot of her wins, and she put on a great performance that a lot of people love. So I do kind of think that she's kind of in the UFC's favor a little bit. She's dating D Gomes. She's still young. I do think they want to kind of protect her as a prospect, and they're giving her a very winnable fight.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll say to push back on my guy Mason, who, he's basically looking at the market read. There's going to be more money on the favorite here in Karol Rosa. The only thing I don't like is Pannie Kianzad, 5-5 in the UFC. Not a productive record. Basically, she's just been hanging on. And then meanwhile, on the other side, Karol Rosa 6-3 in the UFC, put together a winning record and against pretty solid competition as well. So I think that she's probably the better fighter here, but ultimately it's too close a fight for me to feel comfortable at the price.
Yeah. Also, judges.
Oh no, please go ahead.
Also, judges have been all over the place too. So on a fight that we are strongly projecting to go to the decision, like there's been so many like ludicrous decisions that we can come up with. So there's always like that you have to cap also.
The rig show is real. Be weary, folks. Next up, we got somebody who hoped for a rig show last time. Charalampos Grigoriou. He got absolutely whooped by my guy Chad and Hellinger. Then he puts his hand up. One of the only times I've ever had to say after a fight, brother, put your hand down. I tweeted that out. I was proud of that. Just if it was close, put your hands up. See if you can get the judges on your side. I thought it was so clear that Chad and Hellinger whooped his ass in rounds 2 and 3. And honestly, he almost qualified for a finish, I thought, in the 3rd round. He just didn't throw like one committed combination where he put a stamp on it, but he was like, touch, make him look bad, touch, make him look bad. The cardio was a huge gap, right? And I also think Chad and Hellinger is a guy that's one of the most like criminally underrated guys as far as I see it, right? Plus 340 against Muin Gafurov. He goes out there and fights him, looks like a plus 150 or lower. And then you look at, his more recent fights, goes out there against, what's his name? Jose Johnson. He had some moments in that fight, but ultimately the size was too much of a factor. He was lined closely with Haile Alatang, and then he got his nose broken in round 1, made him look worse than he was in that fight. He just couldn't really get going. I think that we saw a much better version of him against Charalampos. That being said, I do not rate Kazama. I think Kazama, the only thing I can say positively, and I like to give positive notes, right? The positive thing I could say, he trains with my boy Tyra. If you want to get better, you go out there, you train with my boy Tyra. He'll teach you what time it is. But I think the problem ultimately is you got a guy who has one good skill and no ancillary skills to set it up. He's not a bad jiu-jitsu player. He was a very talented purple belt. I believe he's now a brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So could he go out there and get to a submission position? I think it's possible, but ultimately I don't like his component of wrestling. I don't like his striking. So it's like, okay, how does he set up getting this fight to the mat? How does he get on top of Charalampos, who I think is strong, a guy who's pretty well built, not going to be easy to just get behind him. So a guy who is a black belt in Chad and Hellinger doesn't close the show, on top of him. I just think to myself, maybe, people would be a little bit too bullish here on the Kazama side, thinking like, hey, Charalampos looks so bad against Chad and Hellinger, but I'm just like, if this guy gets hit with one punch, I'm not convinced he's going to like continue the fight. Kazama got put down by Rinya Nakamura, who's since gone 30 minutes in the UFC. It didn't look like he was in danger of finishing anybody, right? So I think for me, there's enough to think it's probably Charalampos, probably an early KO. I don't like this fight from a betting standpoint because Charalampos at minus 225 is sketchy as all get out, but I just think he's the better fighter. What do you think about this one, Pepe?
I'm going to let John do this one because I know he has a play, so I'll let him break down this fight because I don't have anything and I'm not interested in anything.
Yeah, I mean, I took an early Charalampos price, like minus 180. I think the price where it is now, minus 250, it's about where I capped it. So, like, I wouldn't say bet it here. I mean, I kind of agree with your take, Liam, on the fight in general. I guess my view is, Charalampos obviously has a lot of issues. Like, I don't really think he's a UFC caliber fighter, but, like, you can say don't bet on him at juice because he's not a UFC caliber fighter. But I look at Toshiomi Kazama and I'm like, man, I see guys like leading off LFA that I think are as good as Toshiomi Kazama. Like Charalampos, whatever you want to say, he's at a very good gym. He obviously knows jiu-jitsu. He's a decent wrestler. He's got very, very fast hands. He hits very, very hard. And Kazama, his whole, like when you watch this guy's tape on like Road to UFC, he's trying to just clinch you up in the middle and trip you from there. And like that shit's not working against most of the UFC. I'm like almost positive it's not going to work against Charalampos. So like I think he's either going to have to take him down, which I think is going to be a very tall order, even if Charalampos is tired, and I don't trust his gas tank, but I just don't think he's going to be able to get in on his hips. Strike with him. I don't really think he can do that. I just think the technical speed difference, power difference just massively favors Grigoriou here. Or end up on bottom and sweep him or work off his back. And I do think he can do that, especially if Grigoriou gets tired. Like, the one thing I'll give to Kazama is the dude tries really hard, and I could see outcomes where, like, Grigoriou's tired on top and, like, eating elbows, maybe gets swept and gives up a bad position. But, like, short of that, like, I think round 1 is going to be very, very one-way traffic. And even past round 1, I just think Grigoriou has every tool he needs to keep this upright or get the top position instead of getting taken down. He's a far better fighter. He comes from the far higher pedigree. Obviously, he's in a gym with a lot of like beasts at Longo MMA. I'm not high on Charalampos. I just think this is like the epitome of the UFC trying to get him a win. Like it's very clear. It's like you look at these guys from Road to UFC, and we got what's the Indian guy? We got Jubbly, we got Jekka, and we got Toshiomi Kazama. Like he is in that tier of fighter. Whereas Charalampos, he's fought in like real promotions like CFFC, fought
The
real
Mount
guys
Rushmore
regionally.
of Road to UFC.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. A couple of them are okay, but it's embarrassing the talent level that got put out there. So I mean, that's my opinion. I think Charalampos is going to likely win pretty easily here, though.
Well, then I think we're going to tend to agree. Pepe, do you have any contrarian thoughts here?
No, man, this is just a fight that I'm not interested in betting at all. I don't want to get involved. I'm not bullish on either guy long term, and yeah, I favor Charalampos, but I'm not going to lay the juice.
Well, then we agree. Charalampos, probably not trustworthy because of his cardio. ABCs, they always bet on cardio, but ultimately, I think unless Kazama got on steroids where his chin doesn't deteriorate on the first punch anymore, it's probably going to be a disaster for him. Because Charalampos, the one thing that's good about his game that I liked coming into the UFC is he's aggressive and assertive coming out of the gates in round one. He just typically can't keep it up. And Chad Hellinger, I don't think of as a punk. Right, he's not a guy who's going to give it up to you easy. Jose Johnson had to like strangle the life out of him, right? And he's a huge guy. You look at what's his name, put his nose on the other side of his face. He never wanted to give up in that fight at all. So you knew if you're Charalampos, like I have to have 15 good minutes here, and he didn't. Meanwhile, in this fight, it's like I might need one punch at any point in the fight, and we're cleaned up here. So I think the under at plus 110 is interesting. Charalampos at KO is like plus 104. Again, it's like that. The under and that, I feel like you're probably pretty sound. It's an interesting look, though, because the one thing about Kazama, he's being priced like 5-1 to win by sub. I think that's a vast majority of his win equity here. All right, folks. Next up, we've got a fight that is also difficult to cap for different reasons, right? We've got Yana Santos, way more experienced, a lot better UFC level of competition. It's the activity level that's a little different here. She's coming off the longest layoff on the card, 400 plus days outside the octagon. Meanwhile, Chelsea Chandler has been in there getting some scraps in, not against the highest level of competition, right? Josiane Nunes, though, was on a 9-fight win streak, I believe. I think she closed a favorite in that fight as well. I bet Chelsea Chandler in that spot, thinking to myself, like, this is a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu against a Cesar Gracie brown belt. She's going to take her down and get on top. And honestly, she made that fight a lot harder than she needed to, in my view. Like, could have just taken her down all fight, made it easy. Instead, wanted to prove a point. I can go out there and strike with this girl, took some brain damage for her cause. Okay. When you look at this one, I think to myself, okay, you've got in this spot a Yana Santos who's coming back off a long layoff, who honestly I think has some huge flake vibes, right? Just in terms of like the losses that she has inside the distance, I don't like how they look. That being said, she also has some good minutes out there against high-level opposition, and the Karol Rosa fight could have went either way. I thought Karol Rosa is a deserved winner there, if you ask me. I thought she won the second and the third round, but the second round is like a, flip the coin. It was a very close round. I just thought Karol did a little bit more, was a little bit more assertive, and then in round 3, I thought she clearly won that round, took her down late, and landed some good shots from on top. But that for me is like Yana Santos' downside is if she gets put on the ground, I don't like her prospects, right? I think Chelsea Chandler, that is where she's actually good. It's like get to the mount and throw some hammers at these women, and you will win the fight. But I think that we've seen her get taken down by Stoliarenko. We've seen her get taken down multiple times by Dumont. She can get taken down herself. So the question ultimately for me in this fight is just who gets takedowns, who ends up on top. I think if Chelsea Chandler ends up on top, she could win and finish. Honestly, like I just think that the TKO is not outside the question. I don't think her submissions are that great, as we saw against Josiane Nunes. But Josiane Nunes is also like not a woman that just quit when she was on bottom. She just had no idea what to do. So she's like covering up and trying her best, but she really just did not know what to do to get up from bottom. I had said it was kind of like really low level jiu-jitsu for the UFC. But then when you look at what Chelsea Chandler did, she was just trying to get a win by any means necessary. She missed weight for that fight. She was eligible to be cut if she lost that fight. So I think in this one, if she makes the weight, I do consider her somewhat live personally, just because I don't rate Yana's grit when she gets put in bad positions. I think otherwise, she's a good fighter. She's a good hammer. She can go out there, throw a lot of strikes, do pretty things. But I just think when she gets hit, she kind of just like, brain fries. And I don't like betting on those fighters at chalk. But I do think that, this is a line where based on the level of competition, she kind of has to be favored, or at least a pick 'em here. How do you feel about this one, Pepe?
I played Santos at -106, -110. And you know what? Like last fight, I was on Chandler big against Nunez, and it's because Nunez is extremely low level. And I just think they're on different stratospheres regarding the competition that they faced. Yana Santos, you said that she has the longest layoff of anyone on the card, which is surprising. It's only been a little over a year. Usually there's a little bit longer layoffs on the card, but in this case,
Alan Nascimento was supposed to fight,
oh
and
yeah,
he was
yeah,
going to be the longest layoff, and I was
yeah,
going to
by
bait his
far.
ass, and unfortunately I couldn't. But please
Yeah.
continue.
So, I don't actually mind the layoff for Yana, to be honest, because as we all know, she had a kid a couple years ago, and obviously, the first fight you have back after you have a kid, usually the fighters look awful. Look at Julia Avila against Misha Tate when Mackenzie Dern came back. It usually takes a couple fights before they get back to their prime self or how they were before pre-pregnancy. And I think she has had the sufficient amount of time off now. She has 2 fights under her belt. It's been a few years. She's even stated a couple times that her hormones are back to normal. She's been able to sleep, and she looks good. And I just go through who she's fought and over her UFC career. Like you said that you don't like her losses, but they're against Irene Aldana, one of the best boxers in the UFC, and she was potentially pregnant. Like that whole sketchy timeline. Aspen Ladd in a fight, she was up 2-0, and Ladd kind of just landed a crazy overhand. Can that happen again? Of course. And then Cyborg. So, she's really fought the cream of the cream of the division. Karol, Rosa, Holly Holm, Aldana. She beat Ketlin Vieira, and that was in a co-main event. And like you said, she has the biggest following on social media. Like, I'm not going to pretend like they're trying to push her or anything. I just think this is an extremely winnable matchup, and I don't rate Chandler at all. Like, I thought she was going to make that Nunez fight way easier. She showed in that fight that she really hasn't made that much improvement in her game. Her athleticism is just terrible. Yeah, she's tough as hell. Like, it's going to be really difficult to finish her, but, you had mentioned that Chandler on top is going to be a big issue, but if Yana gets on top, I don't think Chandler's going to have an easy time working her way back up. And, she can land some really hard elbows. I was watching the Ketlin fight again, and the elbows that she was landing at the end of that fight were really, really hard. So I do think she has a lot of scope to put a lot of damage on Chandler. Chandler's striking defense is awful. I like the footwork and speed of Yana. I like the fight IQ of Yana. I like her to be able to win the clinch exchanges. I don't think she's going to like run through her or anything. I just think she's going to get the better of her throughout the fight. And yeah, she looks like she's in amazing shape. So I got Pick'em and I capped it at -150. So I think that it's pretty proper right now.
I'm looking at the Tapology, and I'm seeing 78% of the votes on Chandler, which I do find quite surprising. I did not expect to see so much.
I'm kind of surprised
support.
at that as well, to be honest.
Well, it's like,
yeah,
so the thing is,
especially considering the age gap and whatever, it's like only 1 year. It's not like it's like, there's one age gap between Alencar and Luciano. That's 9 years, right? It's like a huge difference in where they're at in their life. And it's like, this is not that, right? They're 1 year apart from each other. The other girl has more fights. So,
yeah, one of the things that like pushed me over the edge on, making sure I had a multi-unit bet on this was, so Chandler barely has any pro experience. So, and she's only been in the UFC for a couple of fights. She's fought like the bottom of the barrel aside from Dumont, where she got dog walked. So I'm like, oh yeah, in my mind, I thought Chandler was like 26 years old, like this prospect that they're bringing up. No, she's 33, dude. She's only a year younger than Yana. I don't really see her making that many improvements. So that was kind of like the final nail where I'm like, okay, yeah, she's fucking 33 and still terrible. So I feel good about that.
You know what? You're actually talking my language a lot, because we got steroids We got social media. Like we're hitting a lot of my intangible boxes here on the Yana.
Yeah, and she's married to Thiago Santos, whom the UFC respects.
Yeah, although he's gone now. If he was still at the UFC,
yeah, but I think
he's still in their
right? He's still in their good graces, I would imagine. Like he had a hell of a career in the promotion.
Hell yeah, John, what do you think about this one, brother?
I mean, I don't disagree with like any of the technical breakdowns of this fight, right? Like when I saw it and I saw the line and I missed it, I was like, I'm gonna bet Yana pretty big. Like I bet Chandler as well against Josiane Nunes. I thought similar to you, Liam, I felt she underperformed in that fight. I think she's got some obvious glaring holes in her game. No striking defense. Her striking itself is more or less just a heavy left hand, and that's really it. Like she does this like weird thing where she doesn't even have like her right hand up. It's like her right hand's down for no reason, but she's not really jabbing. She's just like pawing and then firing the left. It's like very, very predictable and rote and very easy to deal with. Like I think Yana's a better striker. And if you told me Yana was like, I'm just gonna distance strike with this bitch, like I'm so much better than her, I'm gonna own her, I'd be like, yeah, she's gonna look like minus 250 here because she's just much, much better at that game. My concern is like, and again, like I am a big believer in ELO and level of competition, and Yana's got a gigantic edge there as well. Age gap's not big. I think Yana's honestly probably a better athlete. But like every Yana fight, invariably, Yana decides, I'm going to push this into the clinch. And that scares the shit out of me because Chandler is a large woman. She really shouldn't be fighting at 35. And someone said in the chat, but if she misses weight, I wouldn't be shocked either, to be frank. And my concern is, Yana, when she ends up on bottom, doesn't really have a lot there. Like, I agree with Pepe. If she gets on top, I think she could do some damage here. But if she ends up on bottom, like Chandler's pretty heavy on top, but I actually think decent on top. And so we could be in this situation where it's like they're clinching up and just exchanging like positions in the clinch, and Chandler just trips her down twice and just gets kind of high roll 7 minutes of control out of it, and wins like a pretty comfortable 29-28. And that scares me, and I can't unsee it. The other thing that kind of concerns me with Yana is I don't think she's gassy per se, but she seems to come out with a lot of bursts like every fight, and then it dissipates 2 to 3 minutes in. Like you rewatch the Holm fight, she's pushing Holm hard as fuck in the clinch for about 3 minutes, and then almost like a switch hits, and suddenly it's like Holly's like my turn, and then the rest of that fight is just like one-way traffic. Now, with all of that said, I think Yana should win this fight. I'm not betting Chandler. Like maybe if it got better than plus 150, I'd consider it, but I mean, Yana's better everywhere. She's got the better level of competition. She's the better striker. I think in the aggregate, technically, she's the better grappler. I just feel like Yana's a fighter who, I mean, she's got 45% takedown defense for her career. Pretty much everybody that's tried to get her there has, and she doesn't generally get off her back. And to me, when you're fighting a larger woman who is pretty good on top, that's just a glaring concern. I mean, you go back in the day, Tanya Evinger, I don't think is as physical as Chelsea Chandler is and was able to get her down multiple times and finish her. But yeah, I mean, I think Yana should win. Like, I think if you played her at pick, that's great. I minus 145, I don't know. I think it's kind of getting to the point where it could be getting a little on the wide side, to be honest.
Well, there you have it. For me, I would probably be looking at like some kind of inside the distance prop either way on these women for a way to extract value. Everybody expects this fight to go the distance. And I just don't necessarily see it as that clear cut. I think that on the Chelsea Chandler side, she's pretty bad. She gets hurt really bad in her fights. Norma Dumont like chased her around, but she doesn't have great finishing instincts. And when you look at Norma, she's actually a good UFC fighter. She's like 6-2 or something in the UFC, pretty admirable record. And I think that for Yana Santos, she's not that, but she has gone out there and landed like over 100 strikes. To your point, Pepe busted up the face of Ketlin Vieira really badly and had her second guessing her life decisions in the third round of that fight. So I do, have a feeling that either one of these women could get to a dominant position and the other one could look really bad. Because that's kind of what happens sometimes in low level MMA. But when you talk about a physicality edge, like Chelsea Chandler typically has like a few assertive minutes in her, but she even looked like a little passive in part of the fight against Josie and Nunes, and Nunes is just tiny and couldn't do anything about it. I think Yana wouldn't necessarily do that. She's kind of bull in a china shop. To your point, whether it's good or not, she's going to get into the clinch. She's going to try and rough house you. She's going to try and make it a dogfight. And so, that in and of itself is going to create some violent exchanges, I feel. Please go ahead.
Another thing I wanted to say is, like you guys had mentioned, Chandler really should be fighting at 145. She kills herself to get down to 135. And I think it's because the UFC is slowly getting rid of the 145 division. I don't remember the last 145 fight that was booked. So I think the weight cut is going to be really difficult for Chandler. I do hope she makes weight, because then I know she's absolutely drained and won't have a huge size advantage on Yana. So I'm really hoping she does make weight, and she does need to make weight because she missed it last fight. And Josiane Nunes is garbage. I'm fading her next fight too.
Yeah, and honestly, she'll probably be out of the UFC even if she wins and she can't make the weight, just because they're phasing out 145. And a lot of her fights were 45, 40 catch weight. So she's really got to buckle down and make the weight. And to your point, she doesn't have the most athletic body composition you've ever seen, with all due respect. That could change, right? And I think she'll need to change it a little bit to make 135, but it's just something to note. In any case, guys, getting myself in trouble here. Next up, we got Chris Gutierrez taking on Kang Bang Lee. And I honestly think this should be a fun fight. When you look at a guy who was just in a UFC main event, you look at a guy who's got all these professional fights. He's clearly of a slightly higher caliber and quality, and he's been tested a little bit more. But I don't think he's the most, trustworthy UFC fighter, if you want to put it that way. When you consider the fact, these are the UFC wins we're talking about. Haile Alatang, a guy who, if he hadn't knocked my guy Chad Hellinger's nose to the other side of his face, I think it would have went all types of different ways. Personal opinion. But in any case, he did lose that fight. Fair, sound. Then Pedro Munoz. I bet Pedro is an underdog there. I think it was like plus 160. You can't be a leg kick merchant against a guy who can check leg kicks. That was my whole read on the fight. That was kind of how it played out there. Pedro will just go leg kick for leg kick with you if that's what you want to do. And then you look, Frankie Edgar, washed beyond belief. No disrespect to the legend. Shout out to the New Jersey legend. Danaa Batgari. I was there in person. I thought Danaa Batgari cleanly won the first round. We all saw how that one ended, right? Hats off to you. Cool spinning back fist. But also, is that replicable? Is that something we're going to see from him again? Maybe. It's just not something that I think is very, high percentage, right? Spinning back fist, they're cool. Steven Peterson, a couple guys have them, but it's just like they're not really predictable, super reliable shots, I feel, to knock people out. So then, okay, Felipe Colares, split decision. I mean, who is Felipe Colares? Come on. Andre Ewell, not a very high-level UFC fighter, a guy that was on the wrong end of a lot of highlights. Cody Durden, a flyweight, goes out there and dominates him to a 10-8 in round one. That's why that fight was a draw. So you've seen a lot of Chris Gutierrez kind of underperforming results. Vince Morales, he still doesn't know how to check leg kicks as far as I'm aware. Shout out to Vince, though. He's a tough guy. He goes out there and fights, but he's a boxer, right? He's just getting leg kicked for free all night. Geraldo de Freitas, that guy did not stick around very long. Shout out to him, though. Ryan McDonald, again, long since past names of the UFC. Gutierrez is a sound guy. He's been around for a long time, but he's never really impressed. And if the UFC could replace him for 10-10, they would be more than happy to do so, in my opinion. So I look at a Kang Bang Lee, and this is what I initially thought. I'm like, he's probably just going to get outclassed in the feet. But then you look at the footage, and he goes out there and attempts takedowns. So it's like, is Chris Gutierrez going to take him down where he's at his weakest, where he typically loses close decisions or gets lucky split decisions to go his way that he should have gotten the other way? I mean, that's the danger. That's the liability, right? His grappling doesn't look the best, but that's defensively, right? A lot of times it's just like stuck against the fence, throwing elbows, like halfway taken down, build back up along the fence line. Is Chris Gutierrez going to push a wrestling heavy pace and do the thing that has beaten him in the past? I don't see that. So do I see on his amateur career him getting knocked out in 2 punches in 8 seconds? Yes. But that was literally the first fight of his career. He comes out to 3 seconds in, and he just goes down. We've seen before guys like Gugabe and these guys, they talk about first minute chin. It's a real thing. You go out there, you're nervous, you're tense. Sometimes you get hit one time and you're like, okay, now I'm here. Now I'm in. And I'm in the fight. My adrenaline's going. Otherwise, you're just shitting your pants and it's fight, flight, or freeze. Sometimes guys freeze in a fight. They're like, oh, and they just get hit 1-2, bang, bang, thanks anyways. I feel like for Kang Bang Lee, he's got nothing to lose coming into the fight. He doesn't have to cut that much weight. He sounds confident as fuck in his interviews. And he's like, I know what this guy does. He's going to come out here. He's going to try and calf kick me. He's very good at it. He's like, but I think in the hands, I'm better in the hands. He's like, I'm going to hurt him with my hands. And he's like, and if this comes to wrestling, I can wrestle better than him. And I'm like, I kind of agree. So after watching the tape, I'm like, yes, it's at a lower level. Yes, it's speculative, but it's like, these are the kind of plays that I'm typically on. You have a younger guy coming in with a chance to just upset the apple cart. It's on a little bit of short notice. That's the big danger here. But is Gutierrez like a cardio monster or something like that? He's just, to me, a guy who's got a pretty consistent style to come out there, throw technical kickboxing strikes, and compete over 15 minutes. That's about the ceiling of what he does. He does it well. He does it at like a fringe top 15 level, but we saw him get easily taken down and routed by Song Yadong in his last fight. Honestly, Song Yadong was in second gear, just like take him down, look over at Dana, like, yo, can I get a bigger fight after this? Can we do something for real after this? He just like disregarded him, bro. And honestly, Gutierrez was like yelling at fans and stuff. It was an awkward, weird fight. And so I didn't like his attitude there. I didn't like how passive he was. And coming into this fight, what I like is Kang Bang Lee, nothing to lose, confident as fuck, might have wrestling and grappling upside. It's like, for the price, that's kind of the things I look for. But I haven't gotten in on this price yet. I do think it could continue to blow out, because Chris Gutierrez was literally in a main event last fight. He's a much more well-known commodity, but is he really like head and shoulders above regional level talent? And that's mostly who he's beaten in the UFC as far as I'm concerned. So he's got a big prove-it spot here, but let's find out. John, how do you feel?
I am a bit surprised he's up to like minus 550. Like, honestly, when the fight was announced, I was like, I hope I can bet Gutierrez like minus 185, minus 200. He's against an undefeated fighter. He was like minus 130 against Andre Ewell, to your point. I really thought that the market might value Lay a bit more than it's doing. I don't have the same amount of passion around Lay that you have, just because the spot they're putting him in is really just absolutely the worst here. Like, Gutierrez on a full camp. He's coming in on 4 days notice to fight a specialist. It's almost like, in baseball, like it's like, when the lefty reliever comes in to fight a guy who hits 160 or to face a guy who hits 160 against lefties. Like, it's just like one of those things that, like, if you haven't fought someone like Chris Gutierrez before, he's just a nightmare to deal with, because the guy has kind of perfected that. I'm going to sit on the outside, throw an occasional jab, and just rip leg kicks at you. And I do think Lee is potentially a bit vulnerable to them. So I think Gutierrez should roll. Obviously, he's from he has much higher level of competition. He's much more experienced. There's not really that big of an age difference. Like, Lee's 32 years old. What I will say is, though, to your point, I'll keep it short because you kind of broke it down, Liam. Like, Gutierrez has got some fucking issues, man. Like, I was thinking about betting Javid against him just because this guy on his back is just, horrible. Well, I don't want to say horrible. Like, he's not a guy you're going to cut through and sub, but he's like one of these guys who's just going to close guard and kind of just accept being where he is for the most part, which is a concern against the guy in Lee who may attempt the odd takedown here and there. And he's also just, I can't help but thinking throughout Gutierrez's career, he's got some openings in the stand-up if you pressure him hard enough. He's so jab and distance reliant. When you get inside, he's there to be cracked, and it really hasn't happened to him yet. And maybe it never will. Maybe he's just that good at it. I'm kind of skeptical that's the case, though. Like, I think one of these days he's going to get knocked out just for the kind of games he plays, when you do close distance on him. I'm just skeptical that on short notice like this, Lee is going to have the game plan to come out here, pressure effectively, match the footwork, get inside, and land heavy shots, which is what I think he's going to probably need to do. Like, I don't think it'll be a walk in the park getting Gutierrez down here. Obviously, fighters have done that, but most of them are very, very good. Even Cody Durden, he was undersized, but Durden comes from a serious wrestling background and, is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I can't say I can't picture how Lee wins this fight. I can picture it, lands heavier shots, maybe lands a takedown with 90 seconds, 2 minutes left in a round, holds him down and grinds it out. I just feel like it's it's just a horrible spot to be getting put in here on short notice against a guy like Gutierrez, whose game is like so unique for it's basically like him and Jonathan Martinez, but he plays the game a bit better than Jonathan Martinez does. There's just no one else really like him in high level MMA. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough matchup for Lee here. Minus 550 on Chris Gutierrez, though, a guy who doesn't really knock people out with his hands ever and is very, very leg kick damage reliant, seems a bit on the wide side, especially against the guy who is uber aggressive in Lee. I just wish Lee had a bit more experience against this level of competition. But I do think Gutierrez should win somewhat comfortably.
There you have it. So a little bit of dissension on the panel. I do think that Gutierrez has finish upside with the leg kicks, but I also just think that's clearly been priced in. That's the way I'm seeing this market. How about you, Pepe?
Yeah, I'm relatively familiar with Lay because I bet on him in his past 3 Contender Series fights. And what I will say about him is his competition in LFA has been absolutely terrible. Like, this is a massive, 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 massive step up in competition for him. And I do think there's a pretty good chance that it's just a levels fight. Like, at the same time, like, Gutierrez has won 4 split decisions. Like, yeah. He is the king at making. I don't know. He's never lost
2 draws and 4 split decisions. That's crazy, dude.
I know. I don't know how but like I thought he did enough to win the
the Kolaris fight shouldn't
the Kolaris fight. Yeah, God rest his soul. I thought
absolutely. And guys, I really just want to take 1 second to apologize. I literally forgot that he had passed away. I apologize for that. That was literally said in jest because I couldn't remember who it was. Thank you for pouring some out. That's out of respect. Thank you, sir. Please continue.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's like John alluded to. I think it's a really, really difficult spot for Lay. And, kind of similar to the Chandler thing, like, okay, you got an 8-0 LFA prospect, about to start in the UFC. And then you look and he's 32 years old. And yeah, I was looking to fade Lay on Contenders because I thought he was going to get overvalued because he's undefeated. But when I tell you he's fought like absolute shit on LFA, he's fought like a really, really low level. Like, none of those guys that he has fought will ever sniff the UFC or Contender Series, in my opinion. So I think he's going to be outclassed here personally, but I'm not going to lay the juice on Gutierrez.
Yeah, if anything, I'd prefer like a finish prop or something like that to try and extract value from the Gutierrez side. I think if it comes to a close decision, then you've already fucked up anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of like I was like, oh, maybe I'll bet Gutierrez ITD. Then it's like it's plus 150, and I was like, it's a huge step up. It's like, dude, the guy didn't finish Felipe Kolaris. He didn't finish Andre Ewell. It's like I can't.
Well, Kolaris was super durable outside of the Chase Hooper fight.
That's true. But Ewell though, like
Montel Jackson.
I had Chase Hooper by knockout in that one. I just want
that was a goat call, but Montel Jackson couldn't even finish Kolaris either, and he hits fucking hard.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
But I was gonna say Unibet, Bet Rivers, Camby, they have a plus 195 on Gutierrez inside the distance. What if fight doesn't go the distance? Because then you can get a little bit of potential Lee knockout upside.
Not to go.
What'd you say, Liam?
I'm seeing as high as plus 140 on the fight not to go.
Yeah, I see the same.
That's pretty good. It could be like this could be a crazy war. It's in the Apex little cage. If Lee is really pushing the action, like Gutierrez definitely has finishing upside, and Gutierrez has shown a good chin, but he hasn't really gotten cracked too many times, like John was saying.
I have a sneaky suspicion that like Bang Bang Lee could absolutely clip him in the boxing range. Like Gutierrez has done a good job of like keeping guys out of that range for the most part. But yeah. I think that's the reason Bakary was having success early. He was like disrespecting him coming forward. And then Chris was like, yo, fuck you, get off me. And he hit the spinning back fist and he died. But it's just like,
he gets in some like
Oh,
He
please go
gets in
ahead.
like some weird exchanges against the fence where it's like I don't even know how he's ducking out of it because it doesn't really look like he's moving his head that well, but he seems to always get out of it. That's what I'm saying. Like one of these days, he's gonna get in one of those exchanges with his hands down and just get like flatlined.
Or like when Cody Durden took his back, like he's just gonna get submitted, right? It's like
Yeah.
somebody's gonna take him down and take his back, and then the fight is gonna be over instead of Song Yadong just riding out the top position, right? If somebody gets a little more aggressive with him, that could be a problem. And I do rate the academy just as like a gym. I think they're a pretty solid gym. We've seen quality fighters, UFC level fighters, come out of the gym, and they're also a little bit up there in age. I think what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. Bantamweight. What's that?
Castaneda.
He's a little bit up there in age, right? He's not a spring chicken, but he's a guy that's pretty talented and well-rounded, despite not having like one credential that jumps off the page at you. He just has a lot of skills, and I feel like that's what we could be getting from Lay, as just like he's fought low-level competition, no doubt about it. But even that fight that I said he robbed the guy, it was a close fight. I think the other guy should have won it, but it was still, he landed the more damaging shots over the course of the fight. He was just getting taken down a little, and I don't see that here. So the thing that's been troubling him as a pro isn't something Gutierrez, I think, is going to leverage.
That Sal dude is a pretty solid wrestler, trains at ATT. Like he's a pretty decent wrestler.
And he was keeping a good pace until round 3. He started to really like slow down. And I do think that that's what we saw is like his style slows people down. He was like crotch locking the referee had to separate them. He's not a complete incompetent in the cage grappling by any means. So that for me was a little bit of a bullish signal, but the level of competition, you're betting on speculation, right? Like he could just get exposed. But I also feel at the pricing, it's clear dogger pass the way I bet on him.
I might get involved in fight doesn't go the distance.
Hell yeah, brother. I'm considering the same. So hopefully we get some violence one way or the other. Kang, bang, Lee. Just go out there and somebody bang. It doesn't matter who. Next up, speaking of somebody getting banged, we got Danny Barlow taking on Nikolay Veretnikov. And I've said a few times this week, when you talk about how the UFC deals, right? Sometimes they look at you as like a guy they want to build up, and they give you these guys off the top of the deck, right? They pick the card for you. Oh, this is a nice soft one. We'll give you that. And sometimes they deal you from the bottom of the deck, right? And they're just like, whoever the fuck's the hardest guy, we'll just see what you got. And I don't know that you could put Danny Barlow as the hardest guy you could sign to fight, but it's just like, do you want to sign to fight Danny Barlow? Like, he's on my list of guys I don't want to get punched in the face by. Like, I keep this like running list, right? I don't want to get punched in the face by this guy to break your face. Like, he hits very, very hard. He's extremely intense when he's fighting, throws a decent volume of strikes. And Josh Quinlan looks like he's built like a steroid user. And he was getting hit many times right in the bridge of the face, just like bouncing around like a Pez dispenser, getting fallen over the ground, comes back to his feet, gets knocked over again. It's like this dude was just hitting him with the force of God. Like, he's literally like fumbling around the cage. And when I look at Barlow, so half of that was on the retreat. He's moving backwards, hey, and just hits the guy, and the guy fucking falls backwards. I'm like, that shouldn't happen, right? It's just like physics says that shouldn't happen. And he hits very hard. So when I look at him, I think this is a tough fight for Veretnikov. Last time out, he was dealt, again, bottom of the deck. Michael Morales, we now know 4-0 in the UFC, a guy who's put together a pretty decent win streak. Veretnikov went out there and wins the first round. Looked very good on the Contender Series. In round 1, landed some shots on the feet, but that's a 22-year-old Morales who then says, I'm going to wrestle this guy, and had every bit of success he wanted to. Veretnikov looked like he was going to quit at the end of round 2. Looked like he was going to quit at the end of round 3. I did not like any of those visuals from him, right? Goes out there, rattles off 3 straight wins. He's now 34 years of age coming into this fight, and he's getting a Danny Barlow who is a fucking problem. And just like a guy that I wouldn't want to fight on short notice, right? Yeah, I would want to have ample preparation. I would want to be a grappler by trade if I'm going to fight this guy, right? I'd rather take him down and not exchange blows on the feet. And I do think Veretnikov can exchange blows. He's not a bad fighter. He can go out there and strike a little bit. But I think that the longer this fight goes, the more chance that he's going to wear damage poorly. And I don't think he's going to have much grappling upside. So unfortunately, I think he's getting a left hand to God. And I think he will be getting knocked out in this fight. How about you, John?
Yeah, I am 100% with you, to be honest. Honestly, I know like some people who I really respect who think Veretnikov's like a pretty decent like prospect. I don't really see it personally. I'm not saying he's a bum or anything like that. Like, he's a capable striker, has reasonably heavy hands, but I don't think he's a great grappler. I don't think he's got very good defense, like, at all. And I don't think he's got much head movement. And Barlow is the kind of guy that, 2 years ago I would have tried to fade on principle, but I'm kind of, I've moved beyond that. When you look at Barlow, man, this dude, there will come a time and a place to fade Danny Barlow, but I don't think it's here. The guy's got crazy physical attributes. He's 6'2", 78-inch reach at 170 is like super long. He's as fast as anybody in the division that I can see. I do think his striking's a bit rote. Like, it's not super diverse, but like, unless he's fighting somebody who can really mix the martials, mix up the striking, and take him down, I'm not sure it matters. Like, he's going to be longer than almost everyone he fights. He's very, very fast. He's hard to close distance on. His footwork's pretty good. And so, like, I look at this fight, and it's like, well, what is the Veretnikov path to victory here? He could clip Barlow early, obviously, but he's given away 5 inches of reach. He's given away a ton of speed. Barlow, in my opinion, hits harder. I think he's sharper. He is a lot longer. I think he's much more defensively responsible. So, like, yeah, that could happen, but I think him getting inside Barlow is going to be very, very difficult for Veretnikov. It's like, could he wrestle him? I suppose he could try. Maybe he can have success for around 7 minutes. But I think if he comes out trying to wrestle aggressively, he's going to gas out here. I'm like almost positive. At which point I think Barlow is likely to just put it on him bad. Like, I think Barlow, maybe his cardio is not like elite, but he showed us last fight, he can kind of push a pace for 10 to 12 minutes, and in this kind of fight, I think that's more than enough. I mean, Veretnikov can win the fight, right? It's a fucking cage match with 3-ounce gloves now. Obviously, he could catch him and knock him out. I just feel like it's a very, very friendly stylistic matchup for Barlow. His movement's so much better. He's so much harder to find, coupled with having just much, much better physical attributes than Veretnikov. I just think it's a really uphill climb for him. I think he's got to find something like pretty memey to knock him out. And I don't really think it happens at much of a clip. Like, I think Barlow, like minus 400, minus 450 is probably the true price here. He's a good prospect. Like, I don't think he's coming for the title because I don't think his game's like diverse enough for it. But I think until he runs into like the top 15 to 20, his athleticism and speed is going to give him just a leg up against most of the division.
Hell yeah, brother. I think that we see this fight virtually the same way. I respect his coach as well, Brian Hall, Law School MMA. They've got a couple decent guys down there. But the guy is Danny Barlow. And I think that when you look at how his skills have come together, there's been times where if he was going to just be like a quitter, which is what I always look for as like the biggest red flag for a young fighter, because it's going to get difficult at some point in the UFC, right? You talked about before, Pepe, dealing with adversity, something you almost want to see from somebody before you can really trust them with your money. Danny Barlow was in the CFFC, and a dude was all over him, takes his back, like riding him around, going for rear naked chokes, and nearly sunk it in, not once but twice, had it under the chin, and is like going palm to palm, trying to pull it back, and Barlow just like spins into him underneath in the mount. The guy's not giving up easy. You're going to have to choke him unconscious. You're going to have to snap something. Last fight, he had a broken arm, right? How many guys have we seen like concede in the corner with a broken hand? Say like, I can't keep going. Anthony Pettis, a world champion, said, no mas, I can't do it. You look at this guy, he's like, broken arm. Get over here, kid. He's like still hitting him with his broken arm. Like, I just think that Danny Barlow built for the war. So maybe he comes out of this with some injuries or what. I just think that this guy's going to give you everything on Saturday. I think he's going to give you everything every time. And until he's going against somebody where the skill gap and the skill deficit is such that they're just going to expose him, I don't see him as being beatable. He's kind of like an easy guy to beat, right? He's like a Trevor Peak with skills. It's like Trevor Peak, this guy, he's not going to fuck up. He's going to keep going, he's going to keep trying things. That's like this, except I actually think of him as a good fighter with skills and more intangibles. So for me, that's the Danny Barlow experience. This guy, the kind of guy you don't want to fight because he ain't going to fuck off. How about you, Pepe? What do you think, brother?
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite unders on the card, honestly. I think it's a pretty solid price for the under 1.5, plus 175, under 2.5, minus 130. I think those are both solid plays. I think Nikolay's striking is just too robotic, you know what I mean? And I don't think he's going to have the pace to be able to, really wear Barlow down, honestly. So I'm looking at violence for this fight. Barlow's only 29. He's going to be getting better and better, and he's just like an athletic specimen. Nikolay, like I said, he's just too robotic for a short notice matchup. At one point I did think Nikolay was a solid prospect, but he's kind of shown that he's only been able to get over like pretty low level competition. So yeah, I do think it's a showcase spot for Barlow. I kind of wish that I do wish that Uroš Medic didn't pull out of this fight, because that would have been a fucking cool fight, Medic versus Barlow.
Yeah, I hope they run that one in the future. I'll withhold my thoughts on that one until that one does play out. But in any case, oh no, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, if Barlow gets an early KO here, he's gonna be like a huge favorite in all of his fights moving forward until he loses, I would imagine.
Yeah, the hype train would have left the station, I think, by that point. The things I'll note are as follows, right? I think that Michael Morales didn't have great finishing instincts when he fought Veretnikov. And you could argue still to this day, like something he's working on a little bit, but like in that fight, he owned him and like made it very clear. At the end, he like throws him down to the ground, and Veretnikov's just like laying there, just like basically conceding, like 10 seconds left on the clock or whatever, not trying to get up. He's just like, oh, I lost. And that for me is a horrible visual, right? Where I think Barlow's going to continue to push the whole way. So the thing that I think could be a contrarian angle, I bet this when he was in Contender Series, right? The submission on Danny Barlow. He's not like fucking Johnny Jiu-Jitsu, right? Don't get the wrong idea. But Veretnikov in his last fight against Morales was fucking on his knees, giving up at the end of round 2 and at the end of round 3. It doesn't take great sophistication to go and squeeze the hell out of somebody, right? So that's all it would take is Barlow wrapping up a choke behind him. And by the way, Barlow does have one win by submission. So it's not like it's something that's never happened. He was on top, landing elbows from the crucifix, latches onto the arm. Is he going to do that, a fucking key lock or a Kimura or some Americana variation on this guy? No, I don't see that happening. I think Veretnikov's better than that. But if Veretnikov, who's on short notice here, gasses out in round 2 or 3, and Danny Barlow's been putting a whooping on him, he takes a bad shot from far away, and Danny Barlow spins behind, takes his back, and chokes him out, then you cash the fight not to go the distance, right? Or Danny Barlow ITD, but the plus 123 on the KO or whatever it is, you get caught speeding. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. It's plus 1,200. That's what it was on Contender Series as well against, what's his name? Raheem Forrest, and he just knocked him dead instantly. So that's the Danny Barlow experience, is you bet on the sub and then he knocks him dead instantly. But I think that you can go for the ITD, the under, a bunch of different ways to cover it where you could try and play into that finish equity. And I just wouldn't be surprised if he gets him out of there any which way but loose. I think he's a violent guy, and I do think people are saying he's probably not going to finish every time. I agree. But when you get a showcase type spot against a short notice opponent, you should be going out there looking to finish him, looking to test his cardio when you have a full camp. And I think he's capable of all those things, as we saw against Quinlan. He was like, oh, you want to keep getting up? I'll keep putting you down, son. Get up again. Bing, bing. He was like, let's play Pez all night. And I think that if this guy wants to do that, I think he'll put him down all night. So let's find out.
Yeah, I'm just real quick. The 2-3 sub numbers are huge, 36 and 50 to 1.
I mean, he obviously doesn't finish him every time. We've seen plenty of fights go the distance. But like with that said, or plenty of crazy fights go the distance. But with that said, it's like he's going to put hands on Veretnikov. Unless Veretnikov knocks him out, he is going to put hands on his face a lot of times in this fight. Like, dude, Quinlan took some fucking punishment that fight before he went down, man. Like, you're not, and Veretnikov's style, it's not like I'm going to hang back and like play a distance and try to point fight you. Like, he's going to scrap. So, I mean, Barlow's a big hitter with like, what does he have? Like 6 first round finishes, something like that. I mean, he's going to land heavy often in this fight.
I called him a walking highlight reel.
And he's got those long ass arms to wrap up a front choke in the clinch too.
Oh, I like the sub angle. I do like it.
We're already saying prayers for this Saturday. I think that Danny Barlow is going to let people know that he's a future star in this division, one way or the other. But with that being said, guys, we got next up a fun fight, an interesting scrap. The very first time that Chepe Mariscal is going to close a favorite. Well, I should say the weakest is still young, right? It could always change. But when we're talking about, how it looks right now, he's a substantial favorite against Damon Jackson. And, Damon Jackson, no surprise, right? He's an underdog very frequently. That's not uncommon. The difference is, though, Chepe Mariscal, underdog. Now it's all flipped around because he won those 3 fights in a row. That being said, you go back and look, it wasn't that long ago that he was losing to Sean Soriano, getting out-wrestled and out-grappled on the regional scene by a guy whose grappling is sub-UFC level, to be polite. So I think that for Chepe, he's had this weird run where he beat a few guys, and he did look good for large portions of those fights, but also he's had all these sketchy minutes in those fights as well, where it's like, that could have definitely went different. And against Trevor Peek, I mean, he just owned him. Like, there's no two ways about that. He was way better than him in every position. He beat the shit out of him with his hands. He took him down at will. I think he calls it hood judo. He put the hood judo all over his ass, right? He said, country boys don't know hood judo, so hold this. And then he kept Uchimata-ing him onto his face. And when you look at how he competes, he's a guy that's like scrappy and frenetic, but ultimately he's not the most physical guy you've ever seen. He gets into a lot of these like over-under dogfight exchanges where the other guy ends up, barreled out, right? And he goes arm down on Jack Jenkins, and then Jack Jenkins was like, thanks anyways, my arm just broke. But that was a tough spot where it's like, more often than not, that's just going to be like a competitive 50-50 type spot. And Jack Jenkins won the first round. It was a close first round. I thought that at the later portion of the round, you saw Chepe's skill coming on. He was starting to land some shots, but ultimately I give that first round to Jack. Then they come out, they're having some competitive exchanges. The fight ends a little bit prematurely. It was a weird one, but I say, hey, credit, right? You slam somebody to the ground, they break their shit. It's a fight. Defend yourself at all times. Number one rule. So then, okay, next one up. It's like, then you look at a guy in Chepe. Everybody at the time agreed, like, very close decision at worst, right? Like Morgan Charrier probably won it, but let's say it was a controversial decision, a close decision. Does that merit being a substantial favorite against a guy like Damon Jackson, who's pretty proven as an underdog, goes out there, gets a lot of wins? His recent run in the UFC has been pretty much aces. He lost to Dan Ige. He lost to Billy Quarantillo in a very competitive decision. That one could have went either way. And I thought Billy did just enough in rounds 2 and 3 to edge that one out. You saw Damon make a couple of critical mistakes, falling off of top position, things like that. But he's a big guy. He's long. He's awkward. I think that if Sean Soriano can take you down and hold you down on the regional scene, Damon Jackson has a chance to do the same thing. So at a plus 210 type price, does seem to me to be quite wide. But that being said, our guy Library in the chat said Chepe training with Tatsuro Taira. That is true. And that is a big factor for me. So Kazama, Chepe, can any of them get the rub from the greatest prospect coming out of Asia, Tatsuro Taira? My personal money train. Let's find out. Let's talk to the gentleman about this one. Guys, how do you see the co-main event? Any value to be had? John, we'll start with you, brother.
Yeah, I bet Damon Jackson at plus 187. I mean, you mentioned it, Liam. I don't think a lot of the people at Steam Chepe to minus 240 watched the Sean Soriano fight. I mean, the fight was 4 years ago, so could have made improvements. He's only 29, but I mean, man, Damon Jackson's a tough guy to deal with. He's got his issues. He's a bit fragile. I don't like that a couple times in recent years he's let himself get lured into wars. I don't think that – it's funny because I think Damon Jackson could actually outstrike Chepe if he didn't die. Like, I don't think – like, you know what Chepe's best skill is? He's a fucking pit bull. Like, the guy has no quit in him. He will not stop coming forward. But I think Damon Jackson is the better striker of the two. I just feel like Damon has – way less durability and probably less power than Chepe has. So it's like, I do worry a bit that he's going to get himself stuck in a war. But like in terms of the grappling, I haven't seen a lot to suggest that Chepe is very different today than he was in the Soriano fight. Actually, I've seen some stuff of him on the ground in fights since then that makes me think he's likely very similar to that. And if that's the case, like, I think Damon's going to get takedowns here. I think Chepe... I've seen a couple people say he's great at scrambling, but I really haven't seen it. The guy gives his back very, very easily. Like, I know he beat Pat Sabatini back in the day, but if you watch that fight, like, Pat keeps losing position from jumping arm bars and shit like that. It's not like he's like sweeping Pat or anything along those lines. I think the guy's actually reasonably easy to hold down, and he does tend to give his back up to get up. And Leach is you saw it against Alexander Hernandez in his last fight. He's very, very quick to get a body triangle in. I actually think it's kind of similar to the Dan Argueta fight. Dan has a similar, maybe slightly less level of physicality than Chepe has, but he's a better technical grappler than Chepe is, and Leach just mugged him off the jump. Now, do I think he's going to mug Chepe? No, and I mean, you touched on it. Chepe is very, very spastic in his movements, which is the kind of thing that could really exhaust Damon if the fight goes 15 minutes. I think you kind of saw that with Billy, is that like, he was able to kind of control the pace early and control him from top position. But like Billy's always moving and he's good enough defensively, jiu-jitsu wise, that like he wasn't able to sub him. And so he exhausted a lot of energy early in that fight trying to control him. on top of getting hit in the body 50 times in that fight. But I look at it and like, I know Damon Jackson's the better grappler by like a fairly like large margin. I don't think it matters who Chepe's training with. I mean, the difference in the two of them grappling wise is just pretty significant. What I do worry about is just simply Chepe's a lot younger. He's more durable. I think he hits harder than Damon. He's got better cardio than Damon. Those are all things that like massively concern me. And if the price was pick'em, I'd be like kind of spooked off by it. But I took him at plus 187. There's still I think there's plus 190 on FanDuel right now, if I'm not mistaken, out there. I just feel like I think he's going to have a lot of success early. I think if the pace is too high, there's likely going to be opportunities to bail live here on Chepe. But I don't see many ways this plays out where Chepe dominates the fight start to finish. Whereas I could actually imagine Damon just coming out here and just dominating the fight. I can't really see Chepe doing that short of just a quick knockout. So when that's the case and the guy's priced up at plus 185, like give me Damon Jackson, especially like Chepe's 3-0 in the UFC. He's almost certainly got too much market steam behind him. I'm kind of happy to kind of fade the hype behind Chepe right now. Like I think he's a solid fighter, but he's getting like way too much love at this point.
A 6-fight win streak for Chepe Mariscal on the line against the more seasoned UFC guy in Damon Jackson. How do you see it? The King of Buffalo.
Yeah, I largely agree with both of you. I think it's a market overreaction on Chepe's win streak. And, you know, like you guys noted, he arguably lost the fight against Morgan, and Morgan's not a good grappler. He's been grounded a bunch of times in Cage Warriors. He's kind of a flashy striker, but he kind of plays to he never really pulls away with fights. Like, yeah, he's good technically. It looks very pretty and cool, but as far as like scoring, it's not. He's really hardly ever pulls away with fights. And, you know, I think most people scored that for Morgan. And then the Jenkins fight, the injury, and then Trevor Peek and Peek's debut. Peek is just an awful grappler, man. And Jackson is a dog, dude. Like, I think this line should be closer to like Jackson plus 140, honestly. So I grabbed the plus 205 earlier in the week. I really like this spot. I'm debating if I want to do fight ends inside the distance also, but I don't know, man. Whenever I tend to do money line and a total on a fight, I seem to get burned more times than I double scoop profit. So I don't know. But yeah, Jackson's got good cardio. I mean, yeah, there's been some performances where it was a little sketchier, but we're not playing him at pick'em. We're playing him at plus 200. So I think the line is definitely wide. I'm happy to put some money on Jackson in this spot.
I think from a long-term perspective, like Jackson probably just has to be the money line side here. You know, the way we typically approach MMA, where it's like, okay, you've got a fighter that was valued as, you know, less than 50% 3 times in a row against a fighter, a crop of fighters, let's say, that's not the quality of Damon Jackson overall, or at least not what he's put on paper so far in his UFC run. And now he's a bigger favorite against Damon than he was against any of those guys. That's like a classic example of recency bias. Doesn't mean it's not going to cash, but it's just long-term probably going to be harder to make money on that side. Now, that being said, I think that the way you make money on Chepe is like looking for him to finish this fight, because a lot of people expect like Damon Jackson fights tend to go the distance. He gets knocked out by the very best guys, Dan Ige and Ilia Topuria, but he's also just a guy that's had a million fights. He slows down in every fight. Billy Q's not a great finisher. He had a lot of opportunities to land damaging shots, but he doesn't put him away necessarily, right? So I think that in this kind of fight, you know, maybe Chepe has a chance to put Jackson away, who's a guy who doesn't have the greatest durability, doesn't have the greatest cardio, but in the early going, if you're getting dominated on the mat by some of these guys, like, what's going to happen if Damon Jackson takes you down? He showed against Pat Sabatini, against, you know, even in his fight that he lost against Billy Q, he came out like sitting down on his shots, trying to be super aggressive, punches and kicks right to the face. Like, he's just out there swinging, and he's not afraid of you trying to grapple into him. So he kind of just brings heat early. And I think that that's the kind of thing that makes somebody a live underdog. And also, to your point, makes it so you could potentially arb off at a better price after one round, right? Damon comes out, he presses hot from second one, typically in his fights. Okay, now here's my opportunity, plus money on Chepe. Now I'm just waiting on profit on one side, and hopefully we get Damon, right? But it's like, now I just have no downside. free money is the best money you can make in the world. So if you think that Damon can come out there and win round one, it's an easy live hedge spot if you're watching the fights.
Yeah. So 3 points. Since Jackson's return to the UFC in 2020, his only 2 knockouts are to the 2 hardest hitters in the division, and Topuria and Dan Ige. It's not like he's getting put out by bums or anything.
And he went to war with Billy Q, honestly.
Yeah. Secondly, who's the best grappler that Pepe has faced in his past 6 fights on his win streak now? And third of all, they don't call him the Leech for nothing.
There you have it. I love it. We got a bullish case for the dog here from 2 of our cappers. And for me, I think it's a clear dog or pass. I think I'd probably prefer to just lay the fight not to go the distance if I was interested in chalk on this fight. It's like minus 125. And Damon Jackson has typically been a kill or be killed fighter throughout his career. I do think he's shown he could go to decisions, right? But he always looks very uncomfortable in rounds 2 and 3. He's just that kind of guy. He comes out, sells out very hard for his offense. And even if he is able to get to good positions in round 2, I think he's going to try and sell out for a finish because he does not like to be out there for the full 15 minutes. He went out there to kill Billy Q, and then he just had little left to give in the second and third. And I think that that's kind of what you expect from Damon at this point in his career. Starts hot, burns the candle, and he comes out with a lot of intensity. So, a guy like Pepe, he hasn't really had to deal with that. He went like tit for tat with Jack Jenkins in round 1. It was kind of just a feeling out process, if you will. And I don't think that's going to be the case here. Damon Jackson just goes on a suicide mission, and it's a good day to die. Next up, the main event of the evening, guys. We got quick housekeeping as we go to the main event. I just want to say, drop a like if you haven't already. Thank you to everybody who's still rocking with us live. We got 200 people, I believe, between X and YouTube rocking with us, 400 or something. God bless you guys. I appreciate all the support. Thank you guys for being here. Drop a like, retweet, show some support. I appreciate that. We got the main event. It's a heavyweight fight. And I said bookend rematches. That means that this is a rematch as well, right? We got Marcin Tybura, and he won the last fight. He won it cleanly, but the line is different this time, right? Sergey Spivak went from being a pick'em to a slight favorite, minus 120 about the first time they fought. Now he's sitting at about a minus 150 in this fight against Marcin Tybura. And it's interesting because Marcin Tybura has never lost in Las Vegas, as far as I'm aware. I don't think he's ever lost at the Apex Center. He's done very well in main events relative to Sergey Spivak. I think he's like 2-2 compared to 1-1 or something like that. He's had a little bit more experience. I can't remember off the top of my head. But in any case, what you're looking at is a guy in Marcin Tybura who is 38 years of age. That's the downside, the thing I think people are worried about with him. Also, he gets hurt in every fight. If you just watch his fights, like, it is concerning that he's basically like hurt in round 1 of every fight and finds ways to win him anyway. But Tai Tuivasa like bursts a hole in his head in the first like minute of the fight. If you go back and look, Tom Aspinall destroyed him in the first round. Blagoy Ivanov, I guess, is like, one of the most harmless guys in the heavyweight division. He's a decisionator. Then you look at the Romanov fight. Romanov beat the shit out of him in the first round and could have qualified for a stoppage late in round 1. Obviously he didn't get it, 10-8 round, and then he gets draw out of that. You look at the Volkov fight. Volkov hasn't really asserted himself to try and finish these guys. He's mostly just sticking the jab out there, the 1-2. If you want to fall apart completely, cool. If not, he's just going to keep sticking out the same offense, win over 15 minutes. He's comfortable with that. And then Walt Harris. I mean, Walt Harris came out with some explosive offense and then fell apart. That's just been, unfortunately, the Walt Harris story of late. He's had a lot of personal tragedy and he didn't have great cardio to begin with. He was on, some illicit supplements. So just tough stuff to deal with there. And then the Greg Hardy fight, again, Greg Hardy comes out, lands a handful of decent shots, but he's not a guy that has gas. He's not a guy that can prevent takedowns. And he looks like a white belt off of his back, which we saw against both these guys, as a matter of fact. So I just look at Marcin Tybura as a guy who was knocked out many times in his career, then went on a run where he fought the dregs of the division. He's been the true gatekeeper of gatekeepers. And guys like Tuivasa, he was getting submitted by Sergey Spivak back in 2019 in his hometown, right? It's like we've seen this story over and over again. He doesn't know how to grapple. He can't grapple. He comes out with big shots in round 1. And, if you go out there and swing and bang with Tai Tuivasa, it's a 50-50 fight. If you put him on his ass, you could do it over and over again and beat him. So I just think that we've seen, stylistic matchups between these two guys that don't fully parallel what we're going to see for this Saturday night. And I look at Sergey Spivak, what could change? He's 20 pounds heavier, and he's got a Marcin Tybura who took him down over and over last time. I don't think he's a bad wrestler. I just think he was smaller. He got big man. He got out experienced, a guy who's been around for a long time. And I think he just got put through the paces. They're rerunning this fight, not because they want Marcin Tybura, in my humble opinion, to be like a future global star for the UFC. I mean, he was there like doing side-by-sides with Aspinall before he got killed in the first round, right? He's just like a side character, right? He's like a guy who's happy to be there. Sergey Spivak, I do think, will be around for a little bit longer. He's a young guy. He's still like building his way up as a contender. And to go from like 235 pounds to 255 pounds is a huge difference in the heavyweight division. When you're talking about moving somebody around, it's a lot easier to throw around a 235-pound man than a 255-pound man. And I think that Sergey Spivak knows this time he's going to try to take me down. And I think the reason being is the better striker is Sergey Spivak. And I could be dead wrong, but that is my assessment from watching tape, is that Sergey Spivak back in the day, very uncomfortable boxer, but just was out there like throwing his combinations, knew what he needed to do, would move around a little bit. I've seen him in his recent fights. The Augusto Sakai fight is the one that comes to mind most like vividly. He's sitting on his punches. He's landing good jabs. He's hurting this guy, backing him up. He's landing good 1-2s. If you're doing that against Marcin Tybura, you're going to land first and foremost. He's there to be hit. He's not very good at reacting defensively. So if he can prevent takedowns in this fight and or get on top, be the one on top, I think he could win the fight either of those two ways. So for me, it's like the 29-year-old who can make bigger adjustments, who's a bigger guy coming into this fight, closer to his athletic prime, against the guy who's been knocked out many times. They've got Spivak KO at like plus 200, which seems like sneaky low to me, like telling low to me. And then on top of that, you know, it's being priced almost like he doesn't have a chance to submit Tybura, but it's like Tybura is good at grappling, no doubt about it. But it's heavyweight. And if he gets stuck underneath this guy, I don't think it's going to go very well for him, right? Romanov was just slamming him back to the mat over and over without issue in the first round. He's just a known gasser. I bet Tybura huge in that fight. He was plus 350. So it's like, now you're just looking at a spot where Tybura's lined very close with a guy who I think could flip the script on him and get the takedowns in this fight. But also, I think if he sprawls and brawls and keeps this upright, I think he's going to knock out Marcin Tybura on the feet with his hands. So I could look like a complete fool, but I watched the tape. That's what I felt I took away from it, was that Marcin Tybura, very hittable on the feet, there to be hit. Sergey Spivak these days, throwing a little bit better, throwing a little bit cleaner, landing a little bit harder shots. And I don't think Tybura takes a shot very well at all, and never did. And he had a remarkable run of heavyweight wins despite getting hurt in every fight. But I do think that eventually, like when that comes crashing down, it's going to look ugly, I think. So that's my potential red flag there. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this one, because I haven't parted ways with my coins, but just looking at it, I feel like this is a fight that I could definitely see finishing. That's the difference, I think, from the other fight as well. Sergey Spivak does not like to be pressured. He falls apart under pressure. If Tybura has seen that in his fights, he might come out here and try and stick him to the body, make him uncomfortable, like has happened against Gane and these other guys. I think Aspinall hurt him with a body shot as well. So if I'm Tybura's team, that's what I'm targeting. But I just think he's old and slow, and Sergey Spivak, probably the guy that I would favor to win this fight on the rerun. So I'm interested in what you think, Pepe.
Okay, so I honestly think the fight is probably more likely to go later, to be honest. And what I think the fight is going to come down to is cardio. I do think that it is possible that Spivak gets an early knockout. Like, that's obviously, it's not a lock to go over. I don't think Tybura has a ton of early finish upside. So what I'm fading in playing the over 3.5. I played the over 3.5 at plus money, at plus 100. And I think the only thing I'm fading is early Spivak knockout. And just for me personally, it's hard to price that at like 50%, honestly. If they fight 10 times, is Spivak going to win by knockout 5 times? I don't know. And what I will say about Tybura is Tybura did go through a period where he was getting knocked out. But if you go back and you watch Tybura's evolution over the past few years, you'll see that his boxing is actually improved. He's much more defensively sound than he used to be, and he's got better head movement. Now he's very slow and he's very lumbering, but yeah, Spivak is young. His power is probably improving. There's a lot of room for improvement. He was getting the better of the boxing in the initial fight, and Tybura was just dominating him on the ground. Like Spivak showed that he has very little on bottom. Once you get him down, he doesn't really work his way back up. On the flip side, so if Spivak goes for takedowns and gets Tybura down, I do think that Tybura has shown much more ability to work back up to his feet. And the thing I like about Tybura is he has really good fight IQ. He doesn't really make a lot of big mistakes. He's very positionally sound. He's very dependable. And as an underdog, he's been pretty solid. He's 8-2 in his last 10 fights, and he lost to Cyril Gane and Tom Aspinall. So you look at a lot of their fights where there is an early finish. A lot of the times it's, when they're fighting people with giant grappling deficiencies and they get a finish, or they take a big step up in competition and they get finished. But generally when they fight someone and it's a relatively competitive fight, it usually goes to decision. So I actually think that it's going to go to decision. I'm not really interested in picking a money line side on it. So I'm just playing the over 3.5 at plus 100. And I think it's a relatively competitive fight. I wouldn't be surprised if Spivak is able to just win on athleticism, speed, and improvements in age. But we haven't really seen that out of him. So you're kind of projecting that a little bit. Now, in the fight that got extended against Oleinik, which was turned out to be a kickboxing match, cardio kickboxing match, he looked awful. He's never showed great cardio, so you kind of have to make some assumptions when you're saying that Spivak is going to have the better cardio, because on tape it just isn't there. Now, I'm going to say I don't think Tybura has the greatest cardio either, so I really do think it's going to be a very close decision that is going to be difficult to score, in my opinion, because like even in the Ivanov fight and the Romanov fight, where Tybura is facing two guys who are gassed out and not the greatest strikers at all. He's winning, but he's not really pulling away. He's barely winning. He's winning pretty clear, but it's not like he's hurting them at all. He's not putting them in any danger. So I think it's going to be a close fight that goes to decision.
Fair play, my brother. The thing I would note is I didn't say he has better cardio. I just don't know that it's a lock that Tybura has better cardio, which has been a lot of the bullish case I've heard for him this week. I would point to the Carlos Felipe fight as a fight where in round 3, I thought he was like turning up the aggression and the pressure a little bit. I thought he looked fine in terms of like after the fight, not huffing and puffing. And I thought he won that fight pretty cleanly and did so down the stretch. He won the boxing in round 1, and then round 3, I thought the takedown upside was there.
Even Arlovsky paced Felipe, so I don't really know.
I feel you. But in addition, I would point to the Oleinik fight, right, where it was a lot of cardio kickboxing, but Oleinik is a tricky guy, right? He's a former middleweight. He comes out with the crazy. I mean, fucking beat Fabricio Verdum on the feet. Like he's a weirdo, right? He just comes out and he throws overhands and all this crazy stuff. And if you make a mistake, he'll make you pay. He ended up in bad positions, Spivak, in round 1 and round 2, and didn't get finished, which I actually thought was a good sign from him in terms of defensive submission responsibility. Same thing with Tybura when he's young and small. On top of him, didn't give up. But I think that what could have changed in the interim is like, okay, in that Oleinik fight, round 2 and round 3, he landed bigger shots from on top and like bloodied him up. And honestly, I thought if you have a 4th round there, I think he comes out and finishes Oleinik easily in the 4th round. So that for me is like, okay, it's another old man. It's a good grappler. Obviously, Tybura is a little bit bigger, so it's not as easy to move him around. But I just think that the whole dynamic is like, if he can't get takedowns this time, what does the fight look like for Tybura? That's my real big question mark. And I think last time it was just free takedowns. And I think this time it's like Spivak, if I'm his corner, I'm like, hey, brother, here's what we need to do. Don't get taken down. Because Marcin Tybura, except for that one head kick of Victor Pesta, pretty harmless on the feet, I would reckon, over a large sample in the UFC.
I mean, do any of them have a knockdown in the UFC?
No.
He definitely head kicked Pesta to living.
So other than that head kick, neither of them have a single knockdown in the UFC.
Maybe Walt Harris. I mean, Tybura like beat up Walt Harris. That was kind of just an ugly, gross fight, and I'd have to think about it more, but I don't remember any others. So, John, please go ahead if you have something.
Yeah, I mean, I bet Tybura pretty big, to be honest. Okay, so I agree with both of you guys that Spivak's the better striker, pretty firmly. I actually think, when I'm looking at the KO number being plus 200, I'm like, I kind of think it has to be. Like, I honestly think it has to even be shorter than that for the line to make sense. Personally, for if Spivak's 65%, I think he's KOing Tybura like 45% of the time, like personally. And I say that because while I think he's the better striker, his whole striking game is basically just ones and twos. Like, there's not really a lot clever going on there. He's probably made improvements, but if you actually look at his last 5 fights, he's only landed 20 total significant distance strikes in those 5 fights. 9 against Sakai, 11 against Cyril Gane, and none in the other 3. I mean, generally when Spivak's doing his best work, he is judo throwing guys and just dominating. I think he can outstrike Tybura, and I think he can knock Tybura out. What I am less convinced of is that he can outstrike Tybura over a longer period of time. I mean, maybe if they're a distance the whole time, he can, but I don't really think he's got the footwork to keep Tybura from clinching him up. And I think that can get pretty exhausting. Like, I tend to lean to the Tybura side in cardio pretty heavily. Like, you go back and watch Tybura, I think it was 2 years ago, fighting Alexander Volkov in Abu Dhabi, and now he lost the fight, but he only got outlanded by 15 significant strikes. He attempted 16 takedowns in that fight, and he was still coming for him in round 3 in a stadium that was 100 degrees that day. 16 takedowns and attempting 150 significant strikes is a shitload for heavyweight in a 3-round fight. It's just very, very, very strong output. And I just don't think I do think Spivak can potentially stop his takedowns. He stopped, honestly, 8 out of 10 the first time they fought. It's not like Tybura was easily ripping him to the ground, but I do think Tybura is going to be able to find the clinch pretty consistently. And I kind of think the longer that goes on, it's pretty likely to drag on Spivak's cardio. Additionally, I'm not saying like Spivak can't judo throw Tybura. He probably can, though I think there's a couple issues with it. Number one, you saw it happen once in the first fight. He tried to do it, and Tybura, obviously very savvy grappler, just kind of kept his weight, just took his back and took him down. I think that's a risk that's on the table there. The other thing is I trust Tybura's get-up game like pretty strongly, and I kind of think him going for judo throws results in a situation where they're going to be scrambling and Tybura potentially counter-grappling. And I don't know that Tybura can beat him to positions or that he's athletic enough to do that. But I do think it's the kind of thing where the margin for error, like Tybura just has a lot more because I think Tybura can work up, whereas we just haven't seen a lot to suggest Spivak could. Obviously, the first fight was 5 years ago. The only other sample of Spivak being grounded was against Olenek, though, and he got pretty much insta-mounted and looked kind of clueless on bottom. Now, he's training in Vegas now. He's 29 now. Could he have fixed that? Sure, but I mean, I haven't really seen it. And so, I'm looking at the fight, and I think Spivak's optimal case is they strike a distance, and he either knocks Tybura out or he edges a decision at distance. If they're striking a distance, I really don't think Spivak's going to outperform Volkov. I think he's the better striker, but I think it very likely ends up playing a fairly close fight. Whereas I look at the other side, and I'm like, I mean, if it turns out Tybura can get 3 takedowns over 25 minutes or reverse a couple positions on Spivak, he could win a fairly comfortable decision. And I just don't see a comfortable decision on the Spivak side. My honest view is if Spivak wins, I'm not going to say he can't win a decision. He can obviously win a decision. But I think most of Spivak's win equity is going to run through Spivak hurting him and knocking him out. I really think that, and I think it's likely going to be pretty early because I expect, especially with the extra weight at 255 versus 235, I'd expect Spivak to be carrying a bit more pop in his hands, but I'd also expect, if he's throwing with the kind of heat to hurt Tybura, I think he's pretty likely to slow further into that. And Spivak's cardio in general, it's kind of weird. The Olenek fight's a horrendous look, but he's also looked okay in some other fights, to your point, Liam, the Felipe fight. So I don't really know what to make of it. I guess ultimately, what I think about the fight, it's we have a 15-minute sample that Tybura mostly dominated. Now, the fight was 4 years ago. Spivak is a lot bigger since then. He's gotten a lot more experience. He's won many more high-level fights. He's obviously 9 years younger. All of those are giant macro factors that point to Tybura, or point to Spivak, I should say. But in the first fight, Tybura looked like a fairly large favorite. So it's are those macro indicators enough to say this line should flip from what looked like a minus 300 favorite to being a plus 140 dog? Or does it take you from like a guy who looked like he was potentially 75% to a guy who's like 55, 60%? I tend to lean on the latter there. I can imagine Spivak knocking Tybura out, but like when I go through Tybura's career, the only knockout in it that really concerns me is Augusto Sakai. He kind of swarmed him early and put him out, but it's like Tom Aspinall, I don't really care about, it's like the fast athletic hitters who put him out. That's not Sergey Spivak's game. But I obviously think he can win. He's 29 years old. He's at Extreme Couture. He's a well-rounded fighter. He was lined fairly competitively with Cyril Gane in his last fight. So that's worth bearing in mind too. I keep thinking about it and trying to play it in my head how it goes. And it's just very, very hard for me to see Spivak avoiding the grappling for 25 minutes. And it's very hard for me to see him just kind of dictating this fight at distance for 25 minutes. I feel like if it extends past the opening couple minutes, it's going to be a dirty, greasy kind of fight. And I think that kind of fight favors Tybura like fairly dramatically. Could he lose it? Sure. I mean, maybe Spivak's made the improvements at dumpster him. It's very possible I'm wrong about that. I just have a very hard time imagining not making Tybura a moderate favorite in a fight that extends here. And I'm with Pepe that I do think it's going to extend, but in that case, give me the dog and Marcin Tybura. So I like the Tybura side, and I tend to lean to the over too. Frankly, if I was inclined to take the Spivak side, I'd honestly be looking at KO 1-2 because he did. I will say this, as a bear case for Tybura, Spivak lined up some nice shots on him in the first fight, and Tybura doesn't keep his hands up, and I can pretty easily picture Spivak rocking him bad early in this fight and potentially finishing. So I think KO 1-2 on the Spivak side's not that bad, honestly.
There you have it. I think that this is a interesting fight because the ultimate read for me is like you have two guys that have both fought like the same competition at various points in their career. And looking at some of the common results, that's where I'm leaning towards the Spivak side. For example, the Tai Tuivasa fight, like, yes, it was a long time ago, but then he went out there and he easily, cleanly out-grappled Tai Tuivasa. Then you look at the Tybura example, right? Tybura goes out there, he gets his head nearly blown off in the first exchanges with him. And that for me was a huge problem. Augusto Sakai, it wasn't a very competitive fight. Sergey Spivak beat the shit out of him on the feet, on the ground, took him down, made him quit. Referee basically was forced to intervene. And I thought about that fight. And then you look at how, Augusto Sakai, not a known power puncher, was able to put out Tybura back in the day. I agree with Pepe on the read that his head movement has gotten better. But your point, John, about the hands being down, it's like, my man is literally doing this. And it's like pretty slow motion too. So that for me, just a huge worry, but I agree. His submission equity is there, right? Like Sergey Spivak doesn't seem like the world's most, relentless, gritty competitor, right? When things start to go sideways, we've definitely seen him check out before, but I do think he's a pretty good hammer. And if he's able to get his way, so like starting early in the fight, I just think it could snowball really quickly. A lot of guys kind of like put down the pack and just let Tybura back into fights because they're heavyweights and they've got 2 minutes in the tank. And I think of Spivak as a guy who's like a professional. Is he a great fighter? He's just a professional. I think he's got 15, 18, 20 minutes in him for this kind of fight. And it's in the Apex, right, in Las Vegas where he's training. I think there's some intangibles that kind of work his way here. But additionally, Tybura's never lost in Vegas. He's had a good record. He's done more main events. He's had bigger opportunities. So certainly a competitive line makes a lot of sense here. He won the first fight. A lot of bullish signals on that side, but the tape just gave me a sneaky feeling that Spivak's going to win this one. So got to go with my pick here. But ultimately, I've had a few fights where I tried to lay it against Tybura and lost. If I go back and look, Ben Rothwell back in the day, I thought was going to beat him, right? So I ain't saying I get it right every time, but when Tybura was plus 350, those were the numbers I was looking at. I was like, this doesn't make sense.
That was amazing.
Never again, bro. He'll never again be that price. Like even against Aspinall, he's like the same price as he was against fucking Romanov, and we've seen the class difference there. So
funny? You know what's funny is DeLima was like plus 250 against Romanov, and Romanov submitted him easily in round one. But if they ran that fight back, DeLima would probably be minus 250.
That's
Dude,
the
I
thing
bet
about
three.
betting
I
odds.
bet 3
One
units on
iteration.
Delima. I bet I had 3 units on Delima plus 300 in that fight.
That's a brutality. He got him with the forearm. didn't he?
I was like, all he has to do is make it 10 more seconds, and he's got this. This is like.
And now he's a lifting wizard as well. Like all these different elements he's added to his game. I bet him against Derek Lewis and had, I don't know, 95 cents of CLV, and then he died. So that's been my experience.
John, I hope you were on Tybura against Romanov at least.
Oh yeah, of course. I always bet Marcin though.
Well,
He's like, so like let me be this way. My entire Tybura breakdown, Tybura has been like one of my dogs for years. Like I am a completely biased Marcin Tybura fan. But I respect the blue collar scrappers.
I'm just a consistent Romanov fader. I bet Roque Martinez the over 1.5 rounds at plus money there, cashed it. I had Romanov against Delima, so that's the only one time that I backed him, I think. Then I had Volkov against Romanov at plus money, and I had Tybura at plus 350. And honestly, my biggest betting regret of all time is that was a small bet on Volkov. The dude showed up like he showed up like Jake Collier, like he ate the former Alexander Romanov. He was a second Romanov.
Dude, I bet Romanov in that fight, and that was the only time I bet him in his career. I was like, that was embarrassing.
Did you see him at the weigh-in and go, fuck?
Yeah, literally.
Dude, I literally saw him at the weigh-in, and I was like, no way. He trained in Romania with like his buddies. He was like, let's see how it goes. Like,
I still don't totally know if he is like a good fighter who's just lazy or a guy who was just very fortunate to be match made incredibly well and have Marcos de Lima quit. Like that, I'm not sure, you know?
Questions remain unanswered.
No,
we get our answers on Saturday night. Please go ahead, brother.
He clearly stopped training, dude.
Yeah. Dude, I mean, he looked in insane shape against Tybura.
I know.
Yeah.
File that under things that you hate to see, but we've done it, guys. I appreciate the time from these two gentlemen. Absolutely killed it with the breakdowns today. A lot of analysis, a lot of bets, a lot of banter. Hope that you guys got your fill. God bless you all. I hope that you've enjoyed. I want to kick it over to each one of my guests and let them know where you can find great work from them. The Club and Sub podcast, absolutely crushing over on YouTube. Make sure you go and show love and support to our guy, John Stargarian. Brother, tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me at the Club and Sub Podcast YouTube channel, 7 p.m. Eastern, live every Wednesday night. Obviously, you can watch it after that. You can also find me on Twitter at MMA Fox. Always down to chat fights. If you want to DM me or just comment on Twitter, whatever. I post breakdowns every Saturday morning. Yeah, Liam, thanks for having me on. I had a blast, man.
The pleasure is all mine, brother. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your thoughts and your contributions. Guys, I'm going to have information about both my guests down in the description below. If you're looking for more of it, I'm going to make sure I link their YouTube channels as well. But you can find all their stuff on social media at MMA Fox, at MMA Fox. Make sure you go follow and show some love. And our guy, Pepe Sylvia, the king of New York, my brother from another. Please tell the people where they can find you and all the great work that Fight Numbers is doing.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I had a good time. It's always nice breaking down fights with you guys. It definitely helps my process. It makes me make sure I'm looking at all the fights at a very thorough. And it's nice doing it later in the week because I've done shows like earlier in the week and it's hard to get a good read. Sometimes you need the info to marinate a little bit. So I like doing these shows later in the week. But yeah, my info should be in the description of the show. Follow me on Twitter. Check out what we're doing over at Fight Numbers. We got some cool betting tools. We got some good people over there. The Discord is popping. Got a nice little community over there. And yeah, it's only going to get better. We got some good data that we're bringing in. And our live odds board is pretty sick too for live betting.
Speaking of, guys, let's take a look over at the odds board. We don't get to do this every time on the show, but I'm getting a little more tech savvy here with the fucking StreamYard, okay? And we're trying to figure everything out. The odds board has been a game changer, right? When you're looking at potential value adds, these aren't just numbers that you can get in terms of, okay, I'm looking for a number pre-fight. It's like, all right, I'm trying to live bet. I need to know where do I go get my money down right now during the fight. You can get it on the screen. Of course, my internet is shitting the bed when I'm trying to show this, but here we go, guys. Best available prices on the board. Looks clean, looks great. You can look at it as a whole. You can look at the across the market view, or you could go ahead and toggle the best prices, guys. That's the over-unders. That's the money line sides. Great program if you're trying to win money, if you're trying to be serious about your betting. You can invest in your information, whether that's listening to the sharp panel that they've assembled on their bets, on their ideas, on their breakdowns, or looking at the odds, looking at the information, trying to get the best available price. When you win, you want to win the most possible. When you lose, you want to limit the damages. So guys, God bless you all. Thank you all for the support. Thank you to Fight Numbers for sponsoring the show. Thank you to our two great guests for being here. Thank you to the sharpest chat in the game for assembling each and every Thursday. God bless, good luck, and come back next time. We're having all the same fun again. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Liam.